In a world where magical power decides fate, there was once a man scorned, trampled upon, and branded as the stray dog of a mage family. That man is Aster. He thought he had died in despair, but destiny granted him another chance. A return to the past, carrying the memories and grudges of his former life. From a beggar in back alleys, Aster swore to rewrite his destiny. This time, not merely to survive, but to build a towering citadel of knowledge that would challenge even the mightiest mage clans. And this is where the story of Aster, the one who returned from hell, truly begins. On that fateful day, a majestic wyvern soared through the clouds, its silhouette etching itself into the sky. The great beast circled high above, a living embodiment of untamable power and ferocity. It moved with a breathtaking freedom that Aster, watching from below, had never witnessed in his entire miserable life. But that freedom was a world away from his own reality, as he found himself crashing spectacularly against the forest floor, covered in blood and grime. The young mage gritted his teeth, a new and dangerous resolution hardening in his gaze. He, a stray dog adopted by the great magical house of Declan, had finally seen enough to make a decision. And that sight alone was the one and only reason he decided to retire from his life as a troubleshooter. However, fate, it seems, had a twisted sense of humor, as the sky suddenly darkened with an ominous presence. A single crow with glowing yellow eyes descended, its caw echoing like a death sentence. And with a voice that chilled him to the bone, it spoke a truth he already knew. Now, you're the last one left. A murder of crows blotted out the sun, a grim omen for the conflict that had already begun. Indeed, Aster was already locked in a fierce duel of magic, lightning crackling against the spells of his pursuers. His opponent, caught in an electrifying trap, screamed in disbelief. Number 1. You were hiding your skills. A confident smirk played on Aster's lips as he unleashed a level of power a mere troubleshooter should never possess. Holding a mysterious, stolen book, he completely turned the tables, declaring that now he would be the one asking the questions. His eyes fixed on the ancient tome as it pulsed with a faint, magical light, a prize worth dying for. Under the torment of Aster's magic, his captive could barely gasp out a yes in response to the interrogation. Believe me, the insults from the other mages meant nothing, as Aster retorted that only Declan's trash would hunt one man with a pack. The leader then demanded to know how to use the tome, to which our protagonist admitted with a disarming calm that he had no idea. But deep down, a cold certainty settled in his heart. He knew he had stolen a priceless treasure that the greedy Declan had kept buried for a reason. The pursuer's leader realized with a shock that Aster didn't even know how to use the tome, yet they had chased him this far. The demand to hand over the book only confirmed its value, causing a cold realization to dawn on Aster's face. His captured enemy then attempted a pathetic negotiation, falsely offering mercy and a return to his old life. A mocking smile spread across Aster's face as he saw through the transparent lie immediately. With pure disdain, he shot back a simple question about what power a mere manager had to make such promises, leaving the man speechless. As the man cursed his own powerlessness, the leader prepared to end the charade, asking Aster for his last words. But in that exact moment, a new, overwhelmingly powerful presence descended upon the battlefield, sending a cold sweat down Aster's spine. The young mage's instincts screamed at him, recognizing that the person who had just arrived was dangerous on a completely different level. A man radiating a violent, blood-red aura appeared from the shadows, complementing Aster's sharp instincts. And with a chilling calm, leaning on his cane, the newcomer introduced himself with a simple, terrifying phrase, "A pleasure." This man was none other than the head of House Declan himself, the most powerful and feared mage on the eastern continent. With a terrifyingly serene smile, he politely asked for the tome, promising they would talk afterward. Aster's mind raced. Despite spending half his life with Declan, this was the first time he had ever seen its legendary leader in person. The rumors painted him as the strongest mage in history, and our protagonist couldn't help but wonder what kind of monster he truly was. But the face that greeted him was not monstrous, but disarmingly kind, a calm smile that hid an ocean of power. Faced with this absurd situation, Aster's mind, filled with the image of cute dinosaurs, could only summon a single, weary thought. What a pain in the ass. Somehow, the all-powerful mage seemed to sense the boy's disrespectful thoughts, his own serene expression breaking into one of pure confusion. Done with the charade, Aster dropped all pretense and mocked the head, asking if he wasn't ashamed to steal the loot another had earned. Far from being angered, the leader seemed amused by the boy's audacity, letting out a short, sharp laugh. And just like that, with the auras of both mages flaring to life, the battle between the renegade and the legend was about to begin. Cursing his own terrible luck, Aster couldn't help but regret eating the wyvern that gave him this power, for it had brought this monster to his doorstep. The head's aura was no joke. He was without a doubt the most overwhelmingly powerful mage Aster had ever seen. The leader of Declan then admitted it would be easier to just kill him, but decided to cut to the chase instead. He made an offer that was more of a command. Return the tome, come back to Declan, and all would be forgiven. The man praised Aster's remarkable talent, lamenting that the family hadn't recognized his potential sooner. He called him a filthy stray who used trash techniques, yet somehow possessed an incredible level of skill. And he tempted him with a vision of greatness, asking just how high he could soar with the wings of House Declan supporting him. He painted a beautiful picture of a future filled with glory, where they would make history together. The silver-tongued offer culminated in a simple but powerful command disguised as a plea. Come back to Declan. After a tense silence that stretched for an eternity, Aster finally gave his answer, a quiet word that hung in the air with immense weight. Fine. The leader seemed pleased with the answer, but Aster interrupted, stating that he had one condition of his own. With an arrogant confidence that bordered on insanity, the young renegade declared he would consider it if the head gave him his own seat of power. The man's only response was a serene, unreadable smile, as if the absurd demand was little more than a child's joke. Without waiting for a verbal reply, Aster acted, unleashing his magic on his former captive and asking, "You were watching the fight, weren't you?" The subordinate could only scream in pure agony as the spell consumed him from the inside out. In a matter of seconds, the man was reduced to a lifeless husk, a brutal message to the head of Declan. Then, with a defiant smile, Aster turned to the leader and asked if he could count how many had died by that same power. The head's calm expression finally shattered, replaced by a cold, calculating fury that promised retribution. The negotiations were officially over, and Aster sealed the deal with a chilling warning. In this fight, even a legend could die. The last remaining subordinate could only swallow his fear, knowing deep down that Aster's threat was not a bluff. With a firm stomp on the ground, Aster marked the explosive beginning of the battle that would decide his fate. "Damn right he's not wrong," the boy screamed, his voice filled with a defiant energy as he welcomed the duel to the death. The first clash of their spells was a cataclysmic explosion of red and blue energy that tore the very earth beneath them asunder. With a savage look in his eyes, Aster yelled that you can never know the outcome of a fight until you measure each other's strength. The leader of Declan, his patience finally gone, decided it was time to put the arrogant boy in his place. A complex, blood-red magic circle materialized in the man's hand, pulsing with destructive energy. At his command, gigantic crystal pillars erupted from the ground, surging towards Aster like the jaws of some great beast. And yet, despite the sheer scale of the attack, the leader remained perfectly calm, controlling his immense power with effortless grace. The last subordinate could only watch in terror, his mind screaming that Aster was a complete lunatic for provoking such a monster. As the shockwave from the spell washed over him, the man finally understood the terrifying level of power required to be the head of Declan. The onlooking subordinate could only stare in astonishment, realizing the leader's magical defense was utterly flawless. Taking advantage of a split second of hesitation, the head lunged toward Aster and landed a powerful blow. With an air of absolute superiority, he threw Aster's own words back at him, stating that some power gaps are obvious without needing to be measured. The leader then began to weave a spell of such a massive scale that it left his own man breathless with awe. He declared that this overwhelming power was the true, insurmountable gap that existed between them. A blinding flash and a deafening explosion then erupted from his hands, completely enveloping the young renegade mage. But the head had held back, and as the smoke cleared, he calmly asked Aster if he was now ready to surrender. Like a predator toying with its prey, the man waited for a response in the center of the devastated battlefield. A voice then emerged from the rubble, hypothetically asking if surrender was still an option, but the leader only scoffed at the obvious bluff. And from the smoke, Aster appeared once more, surrounded by a swirling blue aura as he gathered his energy for a final, desperate move. With a look of pure madness etched on his face, Aster screamed that it was obvious the leader would never believe his surrender. "I'm done eating dog food," he roared, unleashing all of his pent-up fury and magic in a single, desperate declaration of freedom. A torrential storm of blue lightning erupted from his hands, a raw and devastating force of nature. The attack slammed into the ground with the force of a meteor, cracking the earth and blasting everything around it. He screamed that he would never return to being a dog, declaring that a shiny leash doesn't change the fact that a grand house is still a kennel. But the head of Declan, witnessing this ultimate display of power, uttered a single, soul-crushing word: pathetic. With a simple, almost lazy defensive spell, the man effortlessly blocked Aster's final, desperate attack without breaking a sweat. And as the blue lightning dissipated, the subordinate saw the leader's true spell, a colossal red magic circle that blotted out the entire sky. "Let me show you," the head said, his voice dangerously calm as he prepared to demonstrate the true meaning of power. Knowing what was to come, the last man standing didn't even dare to watch, turning his head away from the inevitable, brutal conclusion. The subordinate could only curse as he felt the sheer, overwhelming pressure of his leader's magic wash over him. In that instant, as his life flashed before his eyes, Aster's memories carried him back to a stormy day when everything changed. He remembered his own weary face, just moments before he looked up at the sky for no reason at all. And there, he saw it, a majestic wyvern soaring through the clouds with a freedom he desperately craved. But the reason he had looked up was revealed to be a traumatic, unbearable pain that had brought him to his knees. Back in the present, Aster lay broken on the ground, miraculously alive, as the head congratulated him on surviving the blast. With absolute calm, the leader asked if he now, finally, understood the true difference in their power. Defeated, Aster had to admit it. "You're insanely strong," and he agreed to finish their conversation. The young man asked with bitterness if the head just wanted him back as his attack dog, but the leader simply shook his head. And then came the true offer, a proposal so shocking it left Aster's mind completely blank. "I want you to be the head of the Bongshin family." Aster's mind reeled as he understood the sheer scale of Declan's ambition, to use him as a puppet head of a vassal family to challenge the throne itself. Clutching the book, he finally saw the full picture, realizing the tome was the key to this grand, treacherous plan. The head simply smiled, admitting that Aster was underestimating his own worth. He wanted the boy and the tome. Exhausted and sitting on the cold ground, the young mage found himself at a crossroads, negotiating his very future with the most powerful man in the East. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, he seemed to relent and offered the book to the head, a choice the man was quick to praise. Believing he had finally won, the leader reached out with a triumphant smile, ready to claim his prize and forgive the boy's crimes. But just as his fingers were about to touch the cover, Aster, with a mad glint in his eye, engulfed the priceless tome in a violent purple flame. "What are you doing?" the head roared, his face a mask of pure shock and incandescent fury. With a demented grin, Aster reminded him of a forgotten promise, that he could have the book even if it meant receiving it as ashes. As the leader threatened him with a fate worse than death, Aster cut him off, his voice now holding all the power. Shut it and listen." Aster explained that his fight was never about money, but the tome itself was the key to the fortune he now sought. He then posed a chilling question, asking the head if he had ever heard the story of the troubleshooters eaten by Declan's own young master. The book, he revealed, contained forbidden magic, the very same magic that Monster had used to devour his comrades in a crime the family had buried. The head assumed this was about revenge, but Aster denied it, stating with cold certainty that he always knew the life of a troubleshooter was cheap. With a fire burning in his eyes, the young mage revealed his true, far deeper motivation. He simply wanted to ensure his fallen comrades could finally achieve the dream they had always wanted. However, fulfilling that dream required an obscene amount of money, and for that, he needed something more. With a final, resolute smile, he declared his retirement complete, swearing he would never crawl back into the kennel. Turning his back on his powerful foe, he told the leader to consider those his last words. And with a final, dramatic snap of his fingers, the fate of everyone on that desolate battlefield was sealed. The leader of Declan instantly recognized the technique as the family's legendary blue flame, a cursed fire that never dies. He spat a curse, telling Aster to burn for eternity and regret his choice with every fiber of his being. But from within the inferno came a defiant shout, as Aster rejected any notion of regret for his final choice. In his mind, any fate, even accursed death, was infinitely preferable to returning to a life as Declan's dog. And as the eternal flames consumed him, the young mage began to laugh, a sound of pure, manic joy. He screamed not in pain, but in ecstasy, exclaiming that he had not felt this truly free and forever. He accepted his death without a single regret, vowing that if he were ever reborn, he would find true freedom and proper revenge. But then, something impossible happened. The wind and the flames began to converge upon a single point, and in a flash of brilliant light, a younger, completely unharmed Aster appeared in his place, his eyes wide with confusion. From a distance, the head of Declan could only watch in stunned silence, witnessing an impossible miracle unfold. The reborn Aster could not believe his eyes, as the entire world around him seemed to freeze in time. Right before him, the very tome he had just burned materialized from thin air, pulsing with a dark, ethereal glow. The pages of the book dissolved into pure energy, flowing like a river of light and absorbing directly into the boy's body. A strange, golden magic circle in the shape of a clock then appeared on his chest, a brand he had never seen before. Not understanding any of it, as the symbol pulsed with an intense light, he could only scream in confusion at what was happening. Suddenly, his consciousness was ripped from that moment and thrown into another time, another place, awakened by the clink of a coin. He found himself in the tiny body of a child, his mind reeling with the memory of burning to death just a moment before. A deeply unsettling feeling washed over him as he looked around, a sense that something was fundamentally wrong. He wondered where he was, though the grimy alleys and weathered buildings of the city felt disturbingly familiar. And as he looked down at his own small hands holding a beggar's bowl, the impossible truth finally hit him. He had returned to the past. Suddenly, a flood of memories crashed into his mind, and the young Aster finally recognized the squalor around him. He was back in the gray zone, the miserable slum where he had begged every day of his childhood before becoming a troubleshooter. Clutching his chest, the incredible, impossible truth of his situation struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had truly gone back in time. A new sun was rising, a brilliant light that seemed to signify the start of a second chance he had never asked for. The very same town he remembered as a living hell now looked strangely different, almost full of potential. Sitting in a quiet, sunlit field, the boy with the mind of a battle-hardened adult tried to process what had just happened to him. His reflection in the water confirmed it. He was in his younger body, undeniably himself, but a decade in the past. However, he felt a strange warmth on his chest, realizing the mysterious golden fire mark from his death had traveled back with him. He didn't know how, but his instincts told him with absolute certainty that the forbidden magic tome was responsible. The fact that the lazy head of Declan had come for it personally was all the proof he needed of the book's immense, reality-bending power. After a moment of thought, Aster decided to stop questioning his good fortune and embrace this second chance as a golden opportunity. The experience was far too vivid to be a dream. Even the foul stench from a nearby sewer was a welcome confirmation that he was truly alive. And not only was he alive, but young Aster could feel a powerful vitality in his rejuvenated body that he hadn't felt in years. He clenched his fist with a grin, realizing this was a perfect situation where he felt anything he did could succeed. This brought a critical question to Aster's mind. In this new life, what did success truly mean to him? It was then that he remembered the dream he held just before his death, a goal that had defined his final years. It was a dream that was not only his, but one that Aster had inherited from his fallen comrades. Aster recalled the words of his friend, who spoke to him about the true reason he had wanted to retire. His comrades spoke of their harsh past in the gray zone, of growing up with nothing and the pain it caused. The answer had been hunger, but their suffering, he remembered, ran much deeper than an empty stomach. In his memories, Aster's friend asked him what he thought had dragged their lives down into the gutter. The comrade wanted to talk about the real reason for their miserable lives, but a younger, cynical Aster insisted that he didn't care. Annoyed by his indifference, the man finally decided to explain his point of view. He revealed that his most bitter regret was not the hunger, but the lack of education that kept them powerless. If they had only been able to learn and study, they would never have lived as slaves to the nobles. Upon hearing his friend's dream, a smile formed on the young Aster's face as he finally declared what he truly wanted. Aster's dream, he remembered now with perfect clarity, was to build a grand library. It would be a place where anyone, regardless of their wealth, status, or gender, could come to read and learn freely. But now, in this second life, with a chance to do it all over again, Aster decided to take that dream one step further. Instead of just a library, Aster's new, far more ambitious goal was to build a magnificent, sky-piercing tower. In his grand tower, Aster would house every book imaginable, but one text in particular was absolutely essential. His master plan, a delicious piece of revenge, was to place Declan's secret magic manual right on the first floor for any commoner to copy. Aster remembered this was a mischievous dream he shared with his old friends, to steal the noble's power and give it to the people. It was an idea so exciting that, in his memories, just imagining it made their mouths water. The only flaw in Aster's otherwise perfect plan was the small detail of how he was actually going to get his hands on the manual. With a smirk, Aster decided that was a problem for his future self to worry about, savoring the thought for now. But his pleasant daydream was violently interrupted by a sharp pain as a fist slammed directly into his face. A blonde-haired boy was kicking him on the ground, screaming that he had been looking for him all over. The boy was furious, yelling that he had been saving his spot, while Aster had been hiding out. Despite being in the body of a weak child, Aster's mind reacted instantly, his veteran instincts analyzing the ambush. With a speed that defied his small frame, Aster's hand shot out and caught the bully's foot mid-kick. To the bully's utter shock, Aster calmly informed him that he had just been hit 7 times. And with an empty, terrifying look in his eyes, Aster sentenced that he would now receive 70 hits in return. The bully's arrogant expression instantly melted into one of pure, undiluted terror at the boy's threat. A punch then landed with the force of a grown man, and the sound of bone cracking echoed in the alley. But Aster himself was shocked, looking down at his own fist as it glowed with a strange, unfamiliar power. The bully screamed in a rage, furious that a punk like Aster had dared to hit him. Full of righteous anger, the bully charged forward again, kicking Aster mercilessly for his insolence. His body ached, but Aster knew in his heart that the physical pain was nothing compared to the pain of being powerless. However, he felt something had truly changed within him, as he then effortlessly crushed a solid rock under his foot. Using his strange new strength, Aster pushed the bully with surprising force, sending him stumbling backwards in shock. Seeing his chance, the young Aster knew this was the perfect opportunity to make his escape. The boy landed with a loud splash in a disgusting pond of murky water, spitting it out in disgust. While the bully screamed threats from the pond, Aster ran, though in his mind, this was not an escape. Aster called it a tactical retreat, casting a cold glance over his shoulder and promising he would remember the boy's face. To a veteran like him, the bruises he had taken were not a mark of shame, but a medal of honor to be worn proudly. Because Aster was an expert troubleshooter, a man who didn't understand the meaning of the word quit. However, once he was safely hidden in an alley, Aster realized the gravity of his new situation. His mind was that of a seasoned warrior, but his child's body was so weak he had sprained his wrist with a single punch. With a heavy sigh, Aster concluded that before he could even dream of building towers, his first mission was to strengthen this new, fragile body. Sitting alone in the quiet alley, Aster's first question to the strange child who appeared was a simple one. "Are you hungry?" Before him stood a boy with snow-white hair and a single, crimson eye, dressed in fine clothes that were covered in dirt and grime. The boy asked if they knew each other, to which Aster replied with a blunt and simple no. A flicker of understanding crossed Aster's face as he thought to himself that it was just as he had figured. From the boy's expensive clothes, Aster deduced he was the disgraced son of a noble, caught in some messy power struggle. He was, in other words, a pretty little walking bomb, who then proceeded to introduce himself as Damien, son of Bianca. Feeling he was learning far too much dangerous information, Aster bluntly asked the boy if he was right in the head. Damien's reply was simple and shockingly direct. "I don't have a mom," a statement that left Aster momentarily speechless. Trying to end the conversation, Aster retorted that he didn't have a dad, so he wins, and that they should go their separate ways. But the boy simply stood there, an unreadable expression on his face, creating a tense silence between the two children in the alley. Annoyed by the boy's persistence, Aster fought the urge to smack him and simply told him to get lost. Damien, however, completely ignored his hostility and, noticing the bruises on his face, asked if his wounds hurt. Without waiting for an answer, the white-haired boy reached out his hand, cheerfully declaring, "I'll heal it." A brilliant green light enveloped Aster's hands, and he instantly recognized the impossible magic flowing into him. Little Damien simply smiled, proudly calling the incredible power a simple magic touch. But Aster, with the knowledge of a seasoned veteran, knew that was a lie. This was no simple parlor trick. He recognized it as the Light of Healing, the legendary secret technique of the Great House Blander, a family supposedly crushed by Declan. At that moment, his troubleshooter's instincts began screaming, a blaring alarm going off in his mind. A cold dread washed over him as he realized that something dirty, dangerous, and deeply complicated had just dragged him into its affairs. And he could not understand why a child of the still powerful Blander family would be here, in the slums, finally realizing the true weight of the name Damien. The mysterious boy smiled, completely oblivious to the storm of memories and calculations raging inside Aster's mind. As Damien revealed his face, his strange, mismatched eyes, one red, one yellow, caused a jolt of shock to run through Aster. Crap, Aster thought, his mind instantly connecting the dots to a horrifying memory from his past life. He remembered the legend he had heard on a mission, of a member of the Blander bloodline born with unique, mismatched eyes. This person would grow up to be known as the fearsome and destructive monster of Blander. His full name was Damien von Blander, the Mad Butcher, a man so powerful it was said he wouldn't die even if you killed him. But the boy standing before him was no monster. He was an innocent child, watching a trail of ants with pure fascination. As Damien began to happily count the insects, Aster's mind struggled to reconcile the brutal memory with the naive reality before him. The name Blander brought back the memory of that fateful mission, an order given to his team by the Declan family. He remembered his comrades complaining about the assignment, completely unaware of the dark political machinations of their superiors. Aster's memory took him back to that bloody mission, where rumors spoke of a monster that had killed dozens at the Blander estate. He recalled his comrades' innocent speculation, wondering aloud if they were being sent to hunt an ogre. But when a younger Aster arrived at the burning estate, his heart froze with a dread worse than any beast could inspire. What he saw amidst the flames and chaos was not an ogre, but something far more terrifying. It was a human, a man, tearing another person apart with his bare, blood-soaked hands. He watched the man fight with pure, unadulterated madness, laughing maniacally as he healed his own grievous wounds over and over again. It was then that Aster had first learned of the monster of Blander, the immortal Mad Butcher of the battlefield. And the name of that monster, he now remembered with chilling clarity, was Damien von Blander. Yet back in the present, that same future monster was just a small child, giggling happily as he played with ants. The veteran mind of Aster simply could not process the scene, leaving him in a state of utter, bewildered silence. Our protagonist was still trying to understand what the sole heir of the powerful Blander family was doing in a slum, a very logical question. But Damien seemed to have forgotten all about his lineage, as his one and only desire at that moment was food. With a sudden burst of energy, the boy insisted that they eat, wisely quoting his mother on the importance of a good meal for staying healthy. And he wasn't wrong. So Aster, ever the pragmatist, got straight to the point and asked the obvious question. Got any money? What Aster didn't expect, however, was for the boy to produce a bowl filled to the brim with glittering gold coins. In that instant, a brilliant and completely self-serving idea sparked to life in Aster's mind. With the dazzling charisma of a seasoned con artist, Aster gave Damien a thumbs up and declared that from that moment on, they were friends. And as good friends, Aster explained, they absolutely had to share everything, all while dragging Damien away before he could change his mind. The scam worked perfectly, and Damien, his eyes sparkling with joy, celebrated that he had finally found a true friend. But as Damien wondered what his new friend had to offer, something shifted in Aster's heart as he realized an unexpected truth. Now, he had a friend. Damien thought his new friend's heartfelt declaration was incredibly cool, completely unaware of Aster's initial, less than noble intentions. Night fell upon the gray zone, but for the first time in a very long time, neither of the boys would be sleeping on the cold streets. And after a ridiculously luxurious meal courtesy of Damien's gold, the satisfied burp of a grown man echoed in the room. With a full stomach and freshly cleaned, Aster felt like he was on top of the world, a simple luxury he had almost forgotten. It was then that he noticed his new sponsor, Damien, exploring their room with a wide-eyed, childlike curiosity. The rich boy admitted with some surprise that since he always slept outside, he had never realized that buildings had rooms above the restaurants. Ah, I see, Aster thought, slowly beginning to understand the strange, lonely, and incredibly naive life his new friend must have lived. Whether moved by pity or simply by the contentment of a full belly, Aster patted the bed, offering Damien a place to stay for the night. But Damien, in a desperate attempt to connect, brought up their earlier conversation and proudly declared that he didn't have a father either. And so began the world's most absurd competition, as the two boys started arguing about which one of them was the bigger orphan. With relentless and infuriating childlike logic, Damien turned the tables and asked our protagonist, "And you? Don't you have a mom?" The boy then searched the room and, finding no one, logically concluded that Aster's mother must not exist. To escape the increasingly awkward interrogation, Aster decided to investigate and asked Damien how long he had been on his own. The boy's baffling answer was that he had slept 10 times, leading Aster to try and clarify if that meant 10 days. But things only got more confusing when Damien added that he also took a lot of naps, leaving Aster utterly lost. With the pride of a mathematical genius, Damien happily explained his complex system of counting naps, which clarified absolutely nothing. Aster tried his best to calculate that it must have been 3 or 4 days, but Damien's nonsensical logic made it a futile effort. Our protagonist could only sit in stunned silence, processing the fact that he was dealing with someone whose mind operated on a different plane of reality. And just as he was trying to think, his thoughts were interrupted by a flying pillow that appeared out of nowhere, heading straight for his face. As the pillow hit him, Aster had a sudden, brilliant epiphany. The future Mad Butcher wasn't going to become crazy. He already was, right from the very beginning. Our protagonist quickly decided on his new plan. He would act as Damien's nanny while he was stuck in the gray zone to forge a connection with the Blander family. It was a brilliant strategic alliance, as it would undoubtedly help in his future fight against Declan and give him access to a noble family's library. But before any of that, Aster had a much more immediate priority: settling the 57 grudges he had etched into his memory. So, he prepared to meditate and sternly warned Damien not to bother him, or there would be a very big problem. Of course, the future Mad Butcher completely ignored the warning and promptly sat on Aster's chest, interrupting his breathing practice. Once he was finally alone, Aster began his mental training, recalling how in his past life, his magical foundation had been pitifully weak. The standard issue spells given to troubleshooters were useful, but they had very clear and frustrating limitations. That was why, in his previous life, Aster had been forced to risk everything by infiltrating noble houses to steal their secret spells. It was an incredibly dangerous path, one where he had stared death in the face on countless occasions. But now, in this new body, he planned to use all of his stolen, hard-won knowledge to build a perfect foundation right from the start. Lying in bed, Aster began to review all the disparate knowledge he had stolen over the years, starting with the body-hardening techniques of knights. He recalled the complex theories of spirit magic, the intricate circles of summoning, and the volatile formulas of alchemy. It was a chaotic collection of random arts with no solid foundation, which, he now realized, had been his greatest weakness. But then he remembered the power he witnessed just before his death, a truly catastrophic force wielded by the head of the Declan family. That overwhelming, insurmountable difference in power was the very reason he had made his new resolve. This time, he would not make the same mistakes. He would build his power on an unbreakable foundation. And to do that, he would start with Declan's own ultimate foundational art, the heavenly origin technique. Luckily for him, he had memorized the entire technique for research purposes in his past life, meaning he could start his training immediately. And so, focusing his mind, Aster began the breathing exercise to master the legendary and powerful spell. But something went terribly wrong, as his body was instantly consumed by an unbearable, burning pain he had never anticipated. In the midst of his searing agony, Aster forced himself to focus, desperately trying to control the power that was tearing his body apart. It was then that he discovered the source of the pain. His mana circuits were clogged with years of impurities. This was a problem noble children never faced, as their families used elite mages to perform a high-level purification spell on them from a young age. It was an exclusive and expensive ritual, one reserved only for the direct heirs of a noble bloodline. But Aster's body, having grown up on the streets with nothing, had never received such a treatment, leaving his circuits full of trash. And the heavenly origin technique, being a powerful foundational spell, was now forcibly burning away all of those impurities at once. This agonizing process was known among the elite as the mana shower, a trial by fire necessary to be reborn as a true mage. Our protagonist could do nothing but scream and endure the torment as his body was violently forged anew. When the process was finally over, Aster sat up, exhausted and disoriented, wondering how much time had passed. And as he looked to his side, the only answer he found was the peaceful sight of Damien, sleeping soundly through the entire ordeal. The most important discovery for Aster was that, after the agonizing pain, his mana circuits were now purer than they had ever been, even in his past life. But despite this incredible, game-changing power-up, a shadow of doubt still lingered in our protagonist's mind. He knew his ultimate goal remained the same: to defeat the monstrously powerful head of House Declan. It was a feat so difficult that, being brutally honest with himself, he knew it might be impossible even if he were reborn 100 times. And yet, despite the impossible odds, there was one thing the young mage was absolutely sure of. His chances of success had just dramatically increased, and Aster was a man who never quit, not even when faced with near-zero odds. The next morning, an excited Damien was discovering the world from the inn window, a sight completely new to him. The boy was especially thrilled by one small detail. His striking, noble white hair was now a common shade of brown. It was all part of Aster's clever plan. He had changed the boy's hair and clothes so the Blander family wouldn't be able to find him. And now, with his disguise complete, little Damien cheerfully asked his new friend what grand adventure they would be going on next. With his body purified and a new, steely determination in his eyes, Aster had a clear objective in mind. A confident smirk played on his lips, the smile of a man who knows that the scales of fate have finally tipped in his favor. And his first order of business was simple, yet deeply satisfying. It was time to cause a little chaos in the gray zone. Meanwhile, the very same bully who had beaten him the day before was just waking up from a nap, completely oblivious to his approaching doom. The boy stretched lazily in the sun, commenting on the lovely weather, not knowing a storm was brewing just for him. It was then that he saw something that left him utterly speechless and confused. Walking towards him was Aster, the weakling he had beaten up, now accompanied by a mysterious, well-dressed boy who watched him in silence. The bully wasted no time and immediately started running his mouth, mocking Damien's appearance and demanding to know where Aster had been. But before he could even finish his tirade, a devastating punch from Aster sent him flying, silencing him with a single blow. With the bully knocked out cold on the ground, Aster let out a satisfied smile, confirming that he had found the perfect place to begin his revenge. Aster looked down at his foe, his mind replaying every single one of the 123 hits he'd received from this gang in his past life. Just at that moment, the bully's friends arrived, their jaws dropping in shock at the sight of their companion on the ground. In a matter of seconds, the entire gang had surrounded Aster, unable to understand how the weakling they always picked on had managed such a feat. Far from being intimidated, Aster simply smiled, a sinister grin spreading across his face as he recognized every single one of his past tormentors. For the new Aster, this was not a threat. It was the perfect opportunity to test the absolute limits of his newly reborn body. Meanwhile, Damien, in his blissful innocence, simply thought his friend and the other boys were about to start a new, exciting game. The fight began, and Aster's first punch landed with a speed and precision the bully never even saw coming. He moved with the brutal efficiency of a seasoned veteran, each one of his blows a painful repayment for an old debt. A smile of pure, Unadulterated satisfaction danced on his lips as he unleashed years of pent-up rage upon his former bullies. From the sidelines, Damien could only watch in wide-eyed amazement as his new and only friend effortlessly defeated an entire gang all by himself. In the middle of the chaotic brawl, Aster decided it was the perfect time for a teachable moment and began showing Damien how to throw a mana-infused punch. Damien, whose only known talents so far were being adorable and ridiculously rich, was immediately impressed by his friend's amazing skills. Damien, a moment like this is when you say it's awesome, Aster corrected him, all while using a bully's face as a living punching bag. The young boy, blushing with excitement from the battle and the private lesson, shouted that what he was witnessing was absolutely amazing. When one of the bullies finally dropped to the ground, knocked out cold, Damien was left a little confused, unsure of what to do next. So, true to his kind nature, he knelt down and began to heal the very same boy Aster had just brutally defeated. The bully barely had time to stammer out a thank you before Aster, playing the bad cop in this scenario, grabbed him by the shirt. And with a terrifyingly cheerful smile, Aster asked his newly healed victim if he happened to remember just how many times he had hit him in the past. A scream of pure terror echoed through the alley as the boy realized his nightmare was only just beginning. And so, Aster's unique lesson in combat and revenge concluded just in time for the beautiful sunset. After the brutal re-education session, every single member of the gang lay unconscious on the ground, with an exhausted Aster being the only one left standing. Well, almost all of them, as our protagonist decided to give one of the bullies a final little tap to wake him up. The interrogation began, but the victim was so traumatized that he couldn't even remember how many times he had been hit. So Aster, ever the innovator, decided to move on to the next phase of his plan and called over his enthusiastic little friend. Damien began to heal the boy while singing a creepy little song, an act that terrified the bully far more than any of the punches. Behind them, Aster directed the psychological torment with a demonic grin, whispering nonsensical threats into the bully's ear. The poor victim could only beg the two devils to stop, screaming that his brain couldn't count beyond 2 digits. And so, this strange and terrifying session of re-education continued until night finally fell. When it was all over, one of the bullies, with a newfound sense of fear and respect, actually thanked them for the day's lesson. And in the end, the entire gang, now perfectly disciplined, bowed in unison and thanked their new masters. Having delivered over 1,000 hits, a new personal record, Aster felt immensely proud of his work, like a twisted artist admiring his masterpiece. But after such a thorough lesson, our protagonist seemed to hesitate for a brief moment. The leader of the bullies, now with the impeccable manners of a 5-star butler, politely asked for permission to leave. The only, slightly awkward problem was that this entire re-education had taken place in the bully's own home. "Oh, so you want us to leave your house?" Aster asked, his voice dripping with a sweetness that promised nothing but pain. Seeing the demonic look on Aster's face, the bullies immediately recanted, offering to be the ones to leave their own home instead. As he watched them flee, Aster reflected that his actions weren't driven by simple resentment, but by a much larger, more difficult goal. He realized with a sigh that the path he had chosen for this new life was going to be an incredibly difficult one. But his deep thoughts were suddenly interrupted as he sensed an ominous and powerful presence approaching at high speed. And right before them, a menacing, demonic figure crashed down from the sky, making it clear that Aster's problems had only just begun. Aster's mind immediately kicked into gear, his veteran instincts analyzing the newcomer's presence. He was fast, stealthy, and moved like a professional. There was no doubt in his mind that this was a pursuer, most likely sent by the Blander family to retrieve Damien. And while Aster was busy planning his survival strategy against this new threat, Damien was cheerfully waving at the potential assassin. A quick internal check confirmed the worst. Aster had a minimal amount of mana and was still in the weak body of a child. The situation was not good. He was too weak for a physical fight and barely had enough magic for a single spell. But Aster then remembered that he had never been a mage blessed with abundant power. His entire life had been one uphill battle, so this was familiar territory. He decided to bet everything on a single, desperate gamble, and began to gather every last drop of mana in his small body. His plan was simple but incredibly risky. Compress all of his energy into a single point to unleash one devastating attack. As the light on his chest began to glow with a blinding intensity, Aster knew that this tiny amount of power would have to be enough. And with the cold, steady gaze of a veteran ready for battle, he waited for the perfect moment to strike. Without a moment's hesitation, Aster unleashed all of his compressed magic in a single, silent, and incredibly potent attack. It was his one and only chance to incapacitate the pursuer, an all-or-nothing gamble against a powerful, unknown foe. The blast of light hit its mark, and the imposing enemy dropped to his knees, seemingly stunned by the force of the blow. But the assassin's reaction was not one of pain or anger, but something Aster could never have predicted. Instead of a battle cry, the man began to shout at the top of his lungs with a voice full of worry. "Goodness, young master." The supposed pursuer turned out to be a man with an impeccable mustache who had just been taken down by a street kid. Damien's eyes went wide with shock as he instantly recognized his family's butler, Alfredo. And so began the most melodramatic reunion in history, with the butler bursting into tears over the sleepless nights he'd endured. Alfredo clung to the young master for dear life, dramatically pleading for Damien to either return home or just kill him, because the drama comes first. And from the sidelines, Aster, who had prepared for a life-or-death battle, could only listen to the unfolding soap opera with a look of utter disbelief. After his dramatic breakdown, the butler finally composed himself and apologized for the scene, while Damien continued to pout. Alfredo then formally introduced himself to Aster, all while holding his young master tucked under his arm like a loaf of bread. Noticing the obvious affection Damien had for his new friend, Alfredo extended an official invitation for Aster to accompany them back to the family estate. The offer took Aster completely by surprise, his mind racing to understand why a noble family would invite him home. His troubleshooter's instincts went on high alert. He knew from experience that powerful families never did anything out of simple kindness. But then a sly grin spread across his face as he realized this was a golden opportunity. They were unknowingly doing his work for him. Besides, he remembered, their territory was home to the best library in the East, a mandatory stop for some market research for his own future tower. And so, with the grace of a seasoned actor, Aster humbly accepted the generous offer, and Alfredo went to prepare the carriage. While this was a slight detour from his original plan, Aster admitted to himself that it was a very fortunate one indeed. With the deal sealed and a noble's carriage waiting, our protagonist's true motivation came to light. It was time to see if the food was as good as they say. The luxurious carriage ride to the Blander estate stretched well into the night, under the watchful gaze of a full moon. Finally, the magnificent vehicle, which looked like it had been pulled straight from a fairy tale, arrived at its grand destination. So this was the famed Blander estate, a place that our protagonist recognized, though not from any official visits, if you know what I mean. Aster set foot on the opulent territory, feeling less like an honored guest and more like a cat burglar returning to the scene of a past crime. "Is this my first official visit?" he wondered with a perfect poker face, as if he hadn't snuck in to steal their spells in a past life. Upon entering the mansion, the entire household staff was lined up to greet them, an impressive and intimidating spectacle of wealth. The butler, Alfredo, then entrusted the care of the young master to a stern-looking maid with glasses named Lancy. And from the death glare Lancy was giving, Aster knew immediately that she was probably more terrifying than the head of Declan. Little Damien was visibly terrified of the maid, stammering her name with a fear that was all too real. And sure enough, that very same night, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the mansion, confirming Damien had already gotten into trouble with the fearsome Lancy. While our young heroes slept, the real drama was just beginning inside the opulent Blander mansion. The butler, Alfredo, walked down a hallway so luxurious it likely cost more than the entire Gray Zone district combined. With the grim seriousness of a secret agent delivering bad news, the butler knocked on the door to his master's office. He was received by the head of the Blander family himself, a man whose mustache was as elegant and imposing as his mansion. Alfredo reported that he had successfully retrieved the young master from the 7th Black and White Zone, a fancy name for a very poor and dangerous slum. But his report was not for the head, but for a mysterious woman sitting at the desk who radiated the aura of the true boss. The head's calm demeanor shattered in an instant, not by his own anger, but by a terrifying explosion of magical power from the woman. "The 7th Black and White Zone?" she screamed, and from her tone, It was clear that someone was about to have a very, very bad day. Completely forgetting that her son had run away in the first place, her only concern was whether he had been harmed. And with an aura that could make the devil himself tremble, the woman left a chilling, unspoken threat in the air for anyone who might have touched her son. The head of the family calmly attempted to placate the furious matron, likely to prevent their expensive mansion from being leveled. Upon hearing that her son was safe and sound, the woman's fiery aura began to recede, and the temperature in the room returned to normal. "It's a relief," she said, her voice softening as the murderous energy finally dissipated. The head agreed, adding that it was a fortunate outcome for everyone, especially for any poor soul who might have harmed the young master. You see, this overprotective mother was none other than the infamous Blood Witch, a nickname you definitely don't earn by baking cookies. She herself admitted that she had come dangerously close to losing control, and that it was a blessing it had ended with just a scare. Now much calmer, the matron thanked the butler Alfredo for his hard work, her smile almost seeming kind. The head of the family was about to close the subject, but it seemed there was one more small, yet important, detail to discuss. Alfredo mentioned that something unusual had occurred during the rescue mission, immediately recapturing the matron's full attention. The butler was, of course, referring to the new friend Damien had made, a boy named Aster, and the matron wanted to know everything. The butler Alfredo began his report, explaining that the boy, Aster, had sensed his presence long before he revealed himself. He described how the child was already prepared for a counterattack, his instincts honed like a veteran warrior's. In his hand, Aster had formed a mana bullet, a technique that concentrates a mage's full power into a single, devastating point. The matron, Bianca, was immediately impressed, as such talent was unheard of for a child from the slums. And it was for this very reason that the head of the Blander family decided he had to do something drastic. With a seriousness that felt completely out of place, the head asked his wife, the matron, for a very special favor. He then stepped outside the office and, with a solemn voice, called for the boy who had just arrived. And then, in a scene of pure absurdity, the head of one of the world's most noble families bowed deeply and begged the street kid, "Please become the successor." Aster's face was a perfect picture of confusion, like a man who had just been offered a CEO position after winning a back alley brawl. Meanwhile, the butler Alfredo was practically bursting with pride, absolutely certain that this was an offer no stray could possibly refuse. To the head of the family's grand, life-changing proposal, Aster gave a simple, blunt, and utterly shocking answer. No. The nobleman, still in his dramatic bowing pose, could only look up in utter disbelief and ask, "Boy." Aster himself, with a cool and casual air, seemed to be questioning if he had even heard the absurd offer correctly. A quiet "damn it" escaped his lips, the confusion of the moment palpable for both the boy and the stunned noble. The head of the family still could not process the fact that his generous offer had been so casually rejected. Our protagonist couldn't help but wonder if this was all some elaborate prank or if he had completely misunderstood the situation. Beside him, a very confused Damien tugged on his sleeve, asking his new friend what that curse word meant. While putting Damien in a playful headlock, Aster politely clarified his rejection of the offer to become the butler master's successor. The head, though stunned, suddenly seemed to understand, seeing in Aster a young man of humble origins, but with immense natural talent and pride. He saw a reflection of his own wild youth in the boy's defiant spirit, all while Aster was busy having a childish argument with Damien. The head of the Blander family then began to lecture the boy, his voice laced with the condescension of the elite. "Boy, the world is vast." Aster simply replied, "It's not small, indeed," his tone lacking the humility the nobleman had expected. The head continued, assuming that a boy with such natural talent must feel like he could conquer the world. But Aster's response was a simple, disinterested, and utterly infuriating "not really." The boy's casual arrogance began to visibly annoy the nobleman, who squeezed his eyes shut in a moment of pure frustration. "Endure. You must endure," the man told himself, fighting a losing battle to maintain his noble composure. Trying a new approach, he compared Aster to a goblin in a canyon, strong in his own small world, but hopelessly ignorant of the dangers outside. Aster, however, internally scoffed at the comparison, seeing himself not as a lowly goblin, but as a mighty wyvern. And that final act of silent, unadulterated arrogance was the straw that finally broke the camel's back. Losing his patience completely, the head of the family slammed his foot on the ground, roaring that the boy knew absolutely nothing. Enraged by Aster's arrogance, the head of the family declared that he would personally teach the boy a lesson he would never forget. He would show him, in no uncertain terms, just how vast and terrifying the world truly is. With that, he led Aster to one of the grand training halls within the opulent mansion. The man threw the massive doors wide open, revealing the stage where Aster would learn a harsh lesson about true power. Inside, a group of young butlers in training, all appearing to be around Aster's age, looked up in surprise. Upon seeing their master, the youths immediately snapped to attention, greeting the butler master with absolute, unwavering respect. The butler master then explained to Aster that these boys were the officially recognized, elite talents of House Blander. Aster observed them in silence, his veteran eyes scanning the group as he admitted to himself that their power was no joke. He could feel the subtle yet potent auras filling the room, a clear testament to their rigorous and exceptional training. However, a confident smirk crept onto Aster's face. He was impressed, but far from intimidated. Aster looked at the young butlers with their arrogant eyes and thought to himself that they were nothing more than a bunch of sheltered goblins. The butler master, full of hope, asked Aster once more if he would accept the proposal now that he had witnessed the family's talent. But to the man's utter shock, Aster rejected the offer yet again, bluntly stating that he hated the spotlight. Just then, one of the elite trainees, a young man with a smug expression, stepped forward to address his master. It was Winstor, the top apprentice, and it was clear from his face that he had something to say about the guest. He suggested that if Aster had truly felt the power of the family's talents, he would never have rejected such a generous offer. Winstor then volunteered to personally give Aster some experience so that he might finally understand his place. With an arrogant grin, he challenged Aster not to a duel, but to a little taste of what real magic felt like. The butler master found the proposal cocky, but after a moment's thought, he admitted it wasn't a bad idea. And so, he turned to Aster and formally proposed a simple duel between him and the arrogant young Winstor. Aster knew exactly how these elite trainees saw him. As a lucky vagrant, a stray dog who had wandered into a place he didn't belong. In their minds, he wasn't a talented mage, but a sinister outsider who had somehow tricked their masters. He accepted the duel, but with one condition, asking the butler master for permission to choose his own opponent. Without a single moment of hesitation, Aster's finger shot out and pointed directly at Winstor, the arrogant youth who had challenged him. But he didn't stop there, his finger moving deliberately as he proceeded to select 4 other trainees from the stunned crowd. "I'll take on all 5 at once," Aster declared, his voice ringing with an insane confidence that left everyone speechless. With a chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes, he gave them a simple ultimatum. "Scared? Then go die." The boy's outrageous arrogance seemed to visibly annoy the butler master, who let out a sharp grunt. The man's displeasure was clear, his brow furrowed as he processed the sheer audacity of the child before him. But then, his annoyance suddenly melted away into a booming laugh of pure joy as he exclaimed, "Yes, that's the spirit a successor should have." The butler master warned Aster that his words were a grave insult to the honor of House Blander. But Aster simply smirked and replied that he would gladly take full responsibility for his actions. The conditions for the duel were then set. If Aster could survive for a single minute, he would receive a gift, but if he failed, there would be consequences. Aster knew that consequences was just a polite way of saying he'd be roped into the family, but he accepted the challenge without hesitation. As Aster stepped into the arena, the instructor expressed his concern that a 5-on-1 fight was far too dangerous. But the master insisted it was a necessary lesson, believing that Aster's stubborn pride needed to be broken for him to truly grow. Just then, the maid Lancy arrived with Damien, who was immediately confused by the tense atmosphere. The panicked instructor rushed to the young master, begging him to intervene and stop the duel before his friend got seriously hurt. Damien, however, completely misread the situation, his eyes sparkling with pure excitement as he prepared to watch the show. The boy's cheerful reaction left the poor instructor in a state of utter, hopeless despair. The stern maid Lancy quickly warned Damien not to get involved, reminding him that his mother would be furious. Impatient to begin the lesson, the butler master ordered the nervous instructor to start the match immediately. The instructor could only sigh in resignation. Orders were orders, no matter how dangerous or insane they seemed. Lancey watched the proceedings in silence, her serious expression revealing nothing of what she was thinking. Before taking his place as referee, the man gave Damien and Lancey one last warning not to interfere. "Yeah, got it," Damien replied with a mischievous grin that very clearly said, "I make no promises." The instructor stood between the two sides and began to explain the rules, stating that the duel would be turn-based. But Aster, who had no time for such formalities, impatiently cut him off and demanded a free-for-all battle instead. The flustered instructor quickly changed the rules on the fly, declaring it a battle royale that would end only upon surrender. And with the new rules established, Aster stood alone in the arena, his eyes like steel as he prepared for the fight to begin. Windstor and his squad of elite butlers stood ready, their arrogant expressions practically screaming that they were about to put a street rat in his place. He was utterly determined to crush this vagrant brat and expose him as a fraud, not realizing he was the one about to receive a harsh reality check. And with the nervous instructor's reluctant signal, the much-anticipated 5-on-1 duel finally began. But before a single one of them could even take a step, Aster fired a silent mana bullet, instantly taking one of the trainees out of the fight. Windstor could only stare in utter disbelief, his brain apparently short-circuiting as he tried to process the sheer speed of the attack. The smug confidence that had radiated from him just moments before had completely vanished, replaced by pure, unfiltered shock. In what felt like less than a second, all 5 of the so-called elite trainees were writhing on the ground, completely and utterly defeated. Aster then calmly walked up to Windstor, the very same young man who had arrogantly offered to give him some experience. With a terrifying smile playing on his lips, our protagonist decided it was time to give a lesson of his own, starting with rule number 1. Don't underestimate the little guy. The instructor could only stammer from the sidelines, his mind failing to comprehend the monstrous power behind that single, instantaneous, magic bullet. The defeated trainees, in their arrogance, still tried to analyze Aster's technique as basic and inefficient, a classic rookie mistake. But Aster was already moving on to his second lesson, gathering a dark and ominous power that immediately silenced their critiques. His second piece of advice was simple: don't judge people so easily, a lesson he delivered with a massive wave of dark magic. Using the shadowy attack as a brilliant feint, he once again downed all 5 of them with his supposedly useless mana bullets. Not giving them a single moment to recover, Aster got right in their faces to deliver the third, and most important, part of his lecture. Mocking the butler master's own words, he snarled that the world is indeed vast, but it is also incredibly bitter. He then proceeded to give them a very hands-on, practical demonstration of that bitterness with his fists and point-blank mana blasts. With a smile that was anything but kind, Aster promised to inject his entire life's worth of painful experiences directly into them so they could learn properly. The terrified Windstor could only scream that this wasn't magic but the work of a complete lunatic, which, to be fair, was not an inaccurate assessment. But Aster coldly corrected him, stamping his foot down to declare that this raw, brutal, and efficient power is precisely what he considers magic. The duel was less of a fight and more of a one-sided public humiliation, with Aster using his fists and feet as much as his spells. This wasn't the elegant spellcasting of a high noble, but a brutal and ruthlessly efficient style known only as physical magic. The instructor could only watch the carnage in horror, finally realizing the immense gap in skill between his elite students and this boy from the slums. His fellow trainees were equally terrified, seeing their comrades being systematically dismantled with such terrifying ease. But from the butler master's perspective, this wasn't a simple beatdown. It was a masterful demonstration of overwhelming talent. He mentally analyzed the magic bullet from Aster's first attack, deducing its power came from being compressed at least 4 or 5 times. Alfredo then had a chilling realization. If that same bullet had actually hit him during their first encounter, the outcome could have been very different. He concluded that what he was witnessing wasn't just trained skill, but the innate, once-in-a-generation talent of a true prodigy. And as the dust settled, the terrifying image of Aster standing over his traumatized opponents proved that a new monster had just been born in the Blander mansion. While the one-sided massacre was unfolding, Damien was happily minding his own business, playing with his sparkly healing magic. But the fun was suddenly interrupted by the head of the family, who let out a scream of pure, unadulterated terror, calling for his butler, Alfredo. And the butler knew instantly that a scream like that could only mean one thing. The matron of the family, the fearsome Bianca, had arrived on the scene unannounced, and she did not look pleased. Her mere presence sent a wave of collective panic through the onlookers, who knew the real boss had just entered the building. The instructor looked towards the maid Lancy, hoping for a savior, but she seemed about as interested in helping as a cat in a bathtub. Now wearing a blindfold to restrain her power, Bianca demanded an explanation, and the head could only stammer that it was all a simple test. She responded with a glare so cold it could freeze fire, clearly not buying his pathetic excuse for a single second. Looking over the field of beaten and traumatized children, she sarcastically asked if this was his idea of a test. Meanwhile, Aster noticed Damien was preoccupied, apparently trying to break through some kind of invisible magic barrier. With the absolute authority of a true matriarch, Bianca's first command was for the defeated and humiliated trainees to be cleared away. The head of the family, who just moments before had been acting high and mighty, could only bow his head in meek, silent acceptance. She then ordered her son, Damien, back to his room for the time being, much to his obvious disappointment. Aster was also told to return to his room, and his completely unimpressed face showed just how thrilling he found the order. With the children gone, she turned her cold, analytical gaze to the instructor, Runfit, who immediately began to stammer out an excuse. His desperate explanation was likely cut short by a command or a glare that left him utterly shocked. Later that night, with the immediate chaos now handled, the matron summoned the butler, Alfredo, for a private meeting. We then see her in her office, reprimanding the head of the family for his recklessness, acknowledging his intentions but condemning him for taking the test too far. Completely humbled before his powerful wife, the head apologized for losing his temper and dutifully offered to accept any punishment she saw fit. But just as the matter seemed to be settled, Bianca picked up her teacup and said, however, her tone indicating this conversation was far from over. The matron began her interrogation, wanting to know every detail of what had happened in the sparring match and if Damien had gotten involved. The head of the family confirmed Damien hadn't helped, but he seemed to struggle to find the right words to describe Aster's incredible performance. Forgetting all noble decorum, a dreamy, starstruck look appeared on his face as he simply stated that the boy was incredibly good at hitting people. After embarrassingly snapping out of his daze, he gave a more technical analysis, explaining that Aster had used the same magic bullet Alfredo had reported. The true secret to its power, he explained, was that Aster had somehow managed to compress the mana at least 4 or 5 times before firing. A feat of magical engineering like that could only mean one thing, as any experienced mage would instantly recognize. The matron, a top-tier mage herself, immediately came to the same conclusion. The boy possessed an exceptional and innate control over mana. The narration then recapped the unbelievable result of the so-called test. The boy from the slums had single-handedly defeated 5 elite trainees, and he had done it with just one basic magic bullet, a technique that requires immense skill to handle at such a pure and compressed level. But when the matron asked about the other, more important proposal, the head could only report with a hint of sadness that Aster had firmly rejected the offer. After hearing that the little street urchin had brazenly rejected her husband's grand proposal, the matron took a calm, thoughtful sip of her tea. Internally, however, her mind was racing with intrigue. She decided right then that she needed to completely rethink her evaluation of this boy named Aster. And so, with the quiet, unshakable authority that defined her, she gave a simple but heavy order. Bring Aster here. Aster was then escorted to the matron's office, carrying himself with a calm composure that was completely out of place for a child his age. Bianca greeted him with a disarmingly charming smile, while Damien, sitting beside her, happily demonstrated the fine art of stuffing one's face with cookies. From the center of the opulent room, Aster confirmed that he had been summoned, and the matron prepared to begin their little chat. But before they could get down to business, she pushed a small, elegant box across the table toward him. She explained that she had heard a gift was promised to him for passing the test, an act which left Aster completely stunned. The boy's mind flashed back to the condition that the head of the family had set before the one-sided beatdown. He just never, in his wildest dreams, expected to receive the reward so soon, let alone from the hands of the fearsome matron herself. With an enchanting smile that betrayed none of her true intentions, the matron coolly invited Aster to open the box. Aster's hands hesitantly closed around the smooth, heavy case, the silent weight of expectation settling over the room. As he lifted the lid, a blinding golden radiance erupted from within, forcing him to squint as his mind screamed that this was a high-grade item. Inside rested a single, perfect orb of solidified sunlight, an artifact so priceless that only the top 5 mage divisions of the Blander family were permitted to receive one. Yet, the veteran's mind inside the child's body knew a simple, hard-learned truth. Kindness from the powerful ends with a meal, and gifts this valuable always come with strings attached. His thoughts raced as he struggled to comprehend why they would offer such a treasure for a simple wager, the generosity feeling more like a beautifully crafted trap. As if sensing his deep-seated distrust, Bianca explained it was a token of gratitude for helping Damien, and an apology for the day's events. Still completely unconvinced, Aster looked her dead in the eye and asked the most critical question. Wait, do I have to join Blander if I eat this? His mind, shaped by a life of betrayal, immediately leaped to the next grim possibility as he wondered aloud if the precious orb was laced with poison. A soft, barely perceptible laugh escaped the matron's lips as she tried to stifle her amusement at his street-smart paranoia, before finally answering with a gentle, reassuring no. Still wary of the matron's intentions, Aster pressed one last time, asking, "Are you saying there are truly no conditions?" Receiving a placid "it's really nothing" in response, he finally accepted the priceless artifact with a simple thank you. Internally, the boy was ecstatic over this unexpected gain, completely oblivious to the matron's gaze as she prepared her real agenda. Her voice cut through his thoughts with the words, "I have something I'd like to propose to you, Aster," making his instincts scream that he knew a catch was coming. A hand with pristine red nails gently rested on his head, a gesture that was both a tender caress and a subtle claim of ownership. The matron's proposition was finally revealed as she asked with a sly smile, "Would you attend the academy with Damien?" The word academy echoed in Aster's mind, a place so far removed from his world. As Bianca began to explain the circumstances, she revealed that Damien was supposed to have enrolled the previous year, but he strongly opposed it, so it got postponed to this year. While Bianca was lost in the memory of her son's defiance, Aster was simply enjoying a snack, his cheeks puffed out with a cookie. Admitting that Damien likes you, she was met with a bright, enthusiastic reply as Aster declared, "Yep, if I'm with my friend, I'm fine with it." Aster's mind raced, quickly deducing that for a matriarch like Bianca, her son's future was an incredibly big deal. He correctly surmised her fear that forcing the issue would only cause Damien to throw a fit and run away again. With no other obvious way to change Damien's mind, she was strategically using him as the key to her son's compliance. He had to admit it wasn't a bad opportunity, as gaining an academic connection in this world of blood ties was a massive advantage. But a cynical smirk betrayed his true thoughts as the proposal still felt like a beautiful, glittering leash being put on him. Tempering his earlier enthusiasm with newfound caution, he formally told her, "I'll think about it for now," receiving a calm, "understood" in return. However, Bianca wasn't finished, and she smoothly changed the subject by stating, "By the way, this is unrelated, but I'm curious." Her sharp gaze pinned him down as she finally asked the million-dollar question, "Why did you reject Alfredo's proposal to become his successor?" The boy glanced over his shoulder, his cool blue eyes betraying nothing of the surprise he felt at her directness. A confident, almost arrogant smirk slowly spread across his lips as he began his reply, with a teasingly slow "well." The scene flashes back to the butler Alfredo, who was so utterly enraged by the rejection that he looked ready to explode from the very ground. Back in the present, Aster explains his reasoning to the matron with an infuriatingly smug grin. "My knees are precious, you know." Bianca could only stare back with a perfectly tilted head, her mind failing to process the sheer audacity of his answer as she uttered, "Excuse me." The memory shows Alfredo's face moments before, wearing the confident smile of a man who believed his generous offer could never be refused. That confidence shattered completely when the refusal came. leaving him able to do nothing but sweat and stammer out an indignant "boy." Later that night, under a twilight sky, the grand mansion settled into a quiet stillness. Alone in his room, Aster let out a slow, controlled breath, the cool night air mingling with the powerful energy now building inside him. He sat in deep meditation with the gifted artifact, marveling that even a mere 10% absorption caused his mana to surge to an incredible new level. His brilliant blue eyes snapped open as he felt a fundamental shift within himself, realizing his physique was evolving into that of a flameborn. Blue spiritual energy danced around his hand as he concluded the absorption was flawless and pure, a result far more effective than he had ever expected. His meditation finished, the young mage contemplated the academy offer and mused that he thought his answer was already decided. He acknowledged the clear advantages, knowing that enrolling would make it much easier to find a sponsor, but a deep-seated suspicion remained. Staring at his chamber door, he couldn't shake the paranoid feeling that he might be consciously walking right into an elaborate trap. Deciding a walk might clear his head, he moved to the door with a soft click of the handle, thinking to himself, "Should I go for a run around the place?" He stepped out into the silent, moonlit hallway of the grand mansion, his footsteps making almost no sound on the polished floor. A clipped, arrogant voice suddenly cut through the silence from his side, asking, "Are you the guy called Aster?" The boy turned to see a youth with platinum blonde hair and golden eyes leaning against the wall, his arms crossed condescendingly. He quickly analyzed the newcomer, recognizing the family's signature hair color and sighing internally at what a constant hassle they were. When the youth demanded an answer, the protagonist gave a deadpan nope, which caused the stranger to flinch back in utter disbelief, sputtering, No." The blonde youth recovered his composure, looking the boy up and down with a sneer as he dismissively commented on his dingy gray hair. The protagonist's brow twitched in annoyance as the blonde youth, Aster, continued his insults. "That faintly irritating look in your eyes. Everything matches you perfectly." Deciding to counter arrogance with absurdity, he nonchalantly touched his own hair and noted aloud, "Hair color can change a lot depending on the light." He then struck an unnervingly sparkly pose, framing his wide eyes and asking with mock innocence how anyone could possibly find them irritating. This bizarre and dazzling display of fake charm completely short-circuited Aster's brain, leaving him momentarily stunned into silence. Utterly disarmed, Aster conceded that the eyes looked kind, apologized for the misunderstanding, and promptly turned to leave the strange boy behind. The moment of peace was shattered by the butler Alfredo, who scrambled towards Aster, shouting, "I couldn't tell you last night, so I lost sleep over it." Alfredo continued his dramatic, tear-streaked apology, insisting it was all a misunderstanding about the need to wear out one's knees for the butler position. Throughout this chaotic reunion, the protagonist stood by with a wide, eerie, and unwavering smile plastered on his face. Aster could only look back over his shoulder at the groveling butler, his expression a perfect mask of shock and utter confusion. But the instant Aster turned away, the protagonist's smile vanished into a scowl of pure irritation, confirming Aster's initial suspicion about his unpleasant eyes. Pointing an accusing finger, Aster shouted, "Look at this! Lying to me and still acting all brazen," to which the boy simply shrugged. Yeah, you got me." As Aster tried to continue his tirade, his angry words were cut short by the imposing figure of the head butler stepping between them. Alfredo's expression became deadly serious, his eyes narrowing with a silent authority that instantly commanded the room's attention. Aster could only grit his teeth and let out a frustrated hiss, unable to press the issue further under the butler's powerful gaze. With a final sneer, Aster issued a challenge for later at the Mage Hall to fix that attitude, receiving only a bored sure, whatever you say in reply. Once they were alone, Alfredo's stern demeanor softened as he asked the boy, "Is something wrong?" who simply smiled back, "Nothing serious." Internally, however, a predatory smirk formed as the protagonist thought to himself that this was perfect timing since he was already in a bad mood. Aster's grumbling footsteps echoed down the hall as he walked away, his final muttered threat of "I'll see you later," hanging in the air. The protagonist then turned to the impeccably composed head butler, his demeanor shifting from confrontational to perfectly polite. With a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, he made a direct request. Could I meet with the madam right now? The next morning arrived, with bright sunlight glinting off the ornate spires of the grand mansion. Inside her lavish study, the matron paused from her letter-writing to greet her guest with a formal, "Welcome, Aster." A knowing smile played on her lips as she noted his early arrival, asking, "Don't tell me you've already made up your mind." Aster's piercing blue eyes met her gaze without a trace of hesitation as he confirmed, "Yes, madam." Standing with unshakable confidence, he delivered his final answer in a clear and steady voice. "I'll enroll in the academy." The sheer speed and certainty of his decision left even the unflappable matron momentarily speechless with surprise. Recovering quickly, a pleased and gentle smile graced her features as she commented, "I'm surprised you decided so quickly." Aster's confident smirk remained as Bianca affirmed his choice, stating, "Good. We should prepare as soon as possible." As he turned to leave, he gave a respectful bow, saying, "Thank you for your consideration," while she invited him to relax in the meantime. The meeting concluded, and the only sound in the study was the soft, rhythmic scratching of Bianca's pen as she resumed her work. The moment the meeting ended, the head butler Alfredo, who had clearly been listening at the door, peeked into the study. He then entered properly to give his formal report to the matron, stating, "Madam, the boy." He accepted, thankfully. His professional decorum suddenly shattered into fiery passion as he clenched his fists, exclaiming with sparkling eyes, "As expected, that's our boy." Bianca simply watched this completely over-the-top display with a deadpan and thoroughly unimpressed stare. Alfredo, now radiating a dramatic red aura, began laying out his concerns, questioning how the boy would afford the next semester after the family covered the first. His brilliant scheme was to create financial anxiety, believing that a vagrant from the gray zone would become desperate to learn in order to secure funding. And then, at the boy's lowest point, a divine, helping hand would graciously descend from the heavens to save him. That helping hand, of course, would belong to a golden, angelic version of himself, bestowing upon the boy the sponsorship of Alfredo. The matron's voice cut coldly through his delusions of grandeur with a flat, "Alfredo, you're too loud," prompting a flustered apology and a hasty retreat. After the butler scurried away, Bianca's cold expression finally cracked into the faintest, most calculating smirk imaginable. The matron closed her eyes, thinking to herself that she understood Alfredo's overwhelming happiness after having his offers rejected so many times. Even so, a critical part of her mind assessed his scheme to manipulate Aster with tuition fees as a fundamentally sloppy plan. She continued to ponder the true reason why the butler would be so confident in a plan with such obvious flaws. With a weary shake of her head, she correctly deduced it was because he himself had been tricked in the exact same manner by the previous head butler. A final thought of poor guy crossed her mind, accompanied by a pitying mental image of the blissfully unaware butler dancing with joy. Meanwhile, Aster's determined footsteps echoed as he descended a grand staircase on his way to settle the score from earlier. He looked up towards the sky, his expression hardening as he focused on the path ahead. His destination was the impossibly grand mage hall, the very place where the arrogant jerk was supposed to be waiting. Pushing open the massive doors, he stepped out of the light and into the cavernous, dark interior of the building. He was immediately confronted by a mysterious robed figure holding a single candle, whose sudden question, "What brings you here?" left him stammering. Aster was momentarily flustered, suddenly realizing in a moment of chibi-esque panic that he didn't even know the name of the person he came to fight. The robed figure, however, seemed to know exactly who he was, giving a wide grin and saying, "Ah, I was expecting you. Please, this way." Despite the seemingly friendly welcome, the guide's unsettling laugh and creepy demeanor put Aster on high alert as they walked. The guide stopped before a massive set of doors and gestured towards them, telling Aster to go right in here. His guide then offered a bizarre final warning. "Oh, and after you open the door, mind your head," which only deepened Aster's confusion. Bracing himself for the unknown, Aster cautiously pushed the heavy door open and peered into the darkness. An instant later, a cascade of paper talismans flew at his head, making him understand the cryptic warning all too well. As he coughed on the resulting dust, a calm voice from within the room asked, "Ah, are you Aster?" A new figure holding a candle emerged from the gloom, his footsteps echoing as he approached, and said, Nice to meet you. The man revealed himself with a charming smile as Wenji von Blander before asking, "You came to see my little brother?" The revelation hit Aster with the force of a physical blow as he thought with pure disgust. That punk called his brother. The story flashes back to the previous night, where Aster sat alone on a moonlit balcony, lost in deep thought. He was reflecting on a peculiar pattern he had noticed during his time as a troubleshooter infiltrating various magic academies. His thoughts centered on the dedicated mages who study magic, a group with a very specific and predictable path of self-destruction. This path was a defining characteristic of those known as pen holders, who inevitably became overwhelmed by their obsessive research. The constant stress led them to pull out their hair in frustration so often that eventually, it just stopped growing back entirely. He then began to categorize this peculiar descent into madness into a series of logical stages. Stage 1, he mused, was denial, where they would constantly wear their hoods up to hide the evidence of their hair loss. Stage 2 involved giving up this pretense, finally revealing their unfortunate condition to the world in a moment of despair. The third and final stage was full acceptance, where they would completely shave their heads and embrace their new identity. His analysis concluded with the legendary final stage 4, where mages futilely researched the impossible, magic to make hair grow back. Snapping back to reality, he was met with the calm demeanor of Wenji, who began the conversation with a polite, "First, I will apologize." Wenji continued to apologize for his younger brother's rude prank, leaving the protagonist sweating and unable to correct the misunderstanding. Internally, however, Aster was deeply impressed, thinking it was amazing that someone so young could achieve such a high status. As Wenji offered him a cup of tea, Aster asked if he worked at the academy, receiving the calm confirmation, "Yes, I am currently serving as the vice dean." The protagonist took a sip, his mind racing as he concluded that a prestigious family like the Blanders wouldn't grant that title based on bloodline alone. This meant that Wenji, despite his youth, undoubtedly possessed the incredible skills to match his lofty position. A sly smile graced Wenji's lips as he complimented his own brother, remarking that young Master Aster is quite unusual compared to other nobles. Aster could only offer a strained laugh in response, privately wishing the jerk had just stayed up all night instead of having his older brother intervene. Taking a final, satisfying sip of tea, Wenji looked upon the protagonist with a pleased expression, feeling they had great human compatibility. Wenji smoothly changed the subject, offering a polite congratulations on Aster's encouragement to enroll in the Zenion Academy. He then casually mentioned that he was also a graduate, a sudden attempt to build rapport that immediately put Aster on his guard. With a disarming laugh, Wenji apologized for the rambling and suggested they finally get to the main point of their meeting. Yet just as they were about to proceed, he set his teacup down with a decisive click, adding that he had one thing to confirm first. His friendly demeanor evaporated, replaced by a piercing stare as he posed the deadly serious question, "Would you perhaps risk your life for a friend?" The abrupt shift in tone and the sheer gravity of the question left Aster completely blindsided, his mind reeling in confusion. Wenji summoned a book that radiated immense holy power, explaining that this was a matter directly concerning the Blander family's reputation. He presented the glowing tome as the ultimate reward, declaring that if Aster would risk his life, this legendary book would be his. It was no ordinary book, but the core secret of the entire Blander family, the fabled healing light, a secret treatise. The tense scene then cuts away to a sun-drenched garden, where a woman in a straw hat peacefully tends to her flowers, unaware of the dangerous deal being made. The scene returns to the sunlit garden, where the matron, Bianca, was lost in thought as she tended to her flowers. With elegant precision, her silver scissors snipped at a perfect yellow bloom, the only sound in the peaceful morning. She let out a long, satisfied sigh, a tangible expression of the relief she felt now that her plans were in motion. A great weight had been lifted from her mind now that her son Damien's problematic move to the academy was handled without issue. Her thoughts, carried on the sound of chirping birds, turned to the boy named Aster, whom she considered a truly good friend. She acknowledged Alfredo's complaints about his shamelessness but dismissed them, believing his talent was good and his nature was normal for his age. A genuine smile touched her lips as she recalled the single quality about the boy that she admired the most. It was his unwavering attitude, which remained completely free of flattery even after he learned the truth of Damien's background. Her eyes narrowed with calculation as she concluded that this rare trait made him worth keeping by her son's side. However, that same independent spirit led to a chilling realization. A boy like that is a wild bird meant for the open sky, who ultimately won't belong anywhere. Bianca's monologue concluded with the image of an empty cage, solidifying her belief that Aster is like a free bird. A calculating look crossed her face as she coolly decided that she would simply have to devise a method to keep such a person close. Her resolve hardened as she affirmed that for her son Damien's sake, she absolutely could not afford to miss out on a great talent like Aster. The scene snapped back to the dimly lit mage hall, where Aster was still trying to process being offered a secret blander treatise. His eyes narrowed with deep-seated suspicion, his mind instantly screaming the question, is it a trap? From the other side of the table, Wenji observed the boy's transparent and bright eyes, a feature he found particularly intriguing. It was precisely because of this clarity that he was so fascinated, as he found he was completely unable to read any of the boy's true intentions. He noted that unlike normal people, Aster's eyes were like those of a perfect assassin, reflecting absolutely no emotion. Wenji came to a chilling conclusion. The boy was wearing a mask so perfect that perhaps even he himself had forgotten his true self. Just as Wenji cautioned him not to be rash, Aster interrupted with a confident smirk, stating his readiness with a simple, "I'll answer." Aster gave the vice dean a chilling smile and explained his simple motivation. He hates the feeling of unease that comes from not knowing things. He then relaxed into his chair and crossed his legs, nonchalantly inviting Wenji to ask whatever he wanted since they were in the same boat. With a confident smirk, he laid out his own terms with absolute clarity. If it's doable, I'll do it, and if not, I don't have to. Wenji's eyes began to glow with a dangerous light as he warned that if Aster heard the request and refused, I might kill you, young Master Aster. The boy's eyes widened with a manic glee as he replied with shocking nonchalance. Then just kill me, because we only live once, right? A single bead of sweat trickled down his temple as he added, with a perfectly straight face, that for him, it would actually be the second time. A sudden, violent gust of wind erupted in the room, sending papers flying everywhere in a chaotic vortex. An immense, oppressive aura filled the hall as a figure in brilliant white armor materialized behind Wenji, a blood-red sword in his hand. The killing intent was so potent that the tea in a nearby cup violently transformed into blood, splashing onto the table. The armored knight was a manifestation of Wenji himself, whose eyes now glowed with an absolute resolve to kill, if necessary. The murderous aura vanished as quickly as it came, yet Aster remained perfectly still, his arms crossed, and his guard still up. A slow, deeply amused smile spread across Wenji's face as the sheer audacity of the boy's answer finally sunk in. He let out a laugh and ran a hand through his hair, declaring, "Goodness, I can't stand it. Young Master Aster, you have passed the test." Wenji then confessed his true purpose, explaining that he desperately needed someone he could trust who was not a member of the Blander family. The protagonist remained silent, but his inner thoughts revealed that Wenji's earlier killing intent was so potent he had been ready to throw a surprise punch. The vice dean admitted he didn't have high expectations, assuming Aster was just another wayward son from the lower districts. But he had been intrigued, wondering if there was something more to the story of why the family head would bring such a person into their home. And as luck would have it, this boy, who remained a true friend to Damien, turned out to be the exceptional talent he was looking for. Aster skeptically asked if this whole situation was just about a simple quarrel between him and the younger brother. A sinister, plotting grin twisted Wenji's features as he confirmed that this quarrel had provided him with the perfect pretext. Aster's mind raced as he questioned why a man as powerful as a vice dean would need to use his younger sibling as an excuse for a conflict. Wenji explained that it was a difficult situation for him to make the first move, clarifying that it wasn't an internal family power struggle. The vice dean's expression hardened as he lowered his voice to reveal a closely guarded and dangerous secret. He confessed with grave seriousness that he was currently living under the constant surveillance of the Devlin family. The name immediately rang a bell, echoing in Aster's mind as he processed this new, dangerous variable. Seeing the boy's confusion, Wenji decided to be frank, adding that while he had no intention of killing him, his nonchalance about death was helpful. The shocking truth was that he was secretly researching the Devlin family's legendary heavenly origins magic. But as Wenji began to explain how he acquired the forbidden knowledge, Aster held up a hand, cutting him off with a sharp "wait." A single, horrifying question now consumed Aster's thoughts. How is that guy, who should have died a long time ago, still alive? Wenji's smile was full of admiration as he praised Aster's quick thinking, noting the Devlin family was indeed a bit out of the way. Wenji's gaze intensified as he confessed that while he had first only intended to find a way to destroy the magic, he discovered something incredible. An unsettling, obsessive glint appeared in his eyes, revealing the true depth of his fixation on the forbidden research. He explained that the Devlin's magic was a perfect fusion of multiple elements, a tome of untold power and potential. A crazed smile spread across his face as he clutched his chest, admitting with fanatical passion, "I can't stop." This chilling confession led Aster to a single, terrifying conclusion. This person was not only crazy, he was extremely crazy. He couldn't help but wonder if this type of lunatic obsession with research was a common trait within the Blander family. Suddenly, a horrifying realization dawned on Aster as the timing of Wenji's research perfectly matched the annihilation of the Blander family in his past life. He remembered that Farin had used Declan's very survival as a bargaining chip to motivate him to strike the Blander family. Everything became terrifyingly clear. From the very beginning, Wenji had seen the immense possibility within his research on the new Thousand Circle. And the reason Declan had been so absurdly strong in the past was because he was secretly empowered by Wenji's own revolutionary magic. The terrible memory of the past timeline's magical cataclysm flashed through Aster's mind. A disaster he now understood was caused by this man. He was snapped back to the present by Wenji's voice, which gently prompted him out of his shocked silence. After letting out a long sigh to compose himself, Aster finally asked the Vice Dean what the true reason was for seeking him out. Wenji revealed that he had kept his research a secret from his family, and although he suspected a spy, he could never find the source of the leak. With a skeptical expression, Aster suggested the most logical culprit would be someone close with access to his work, like a secretary. Wenji casually dismissed the idea, explaining that the problem was more complicated and related to the acquisition route for his materials. Laughing, he confirmed that once he realized he was being tailed, a part of the security formula unraveled, and he certainly doesn't want to die. When Aster slyly suggested it would be easier to just side with Declan, Wenji deflected the question, vaguely stating he had personal reasons for his actions. Wenji's demeanor became serious as he explained the task, stating that since Aster is an outsider, he must undertake a secret mission. He confessed that he's hit a dead end in his part of the research and, with papers flying around him, admitted he can't make any further progress alone. The Vice Dean held out a stack of papers containing his research thesis, promising that Aster would be properly rewarded for his help. His mission was simple yet dangerous. Please deliver this thesis to Professor Perrin of Zenion Academy. As payment for this risky delivery, Wenji offered the legendary Blander family treasure, the healing light spell. A slow, predatory grin spread across Aster's face as his mind instantly recognized this as a golden opportunity. He leaned forward eagerly, the legs of his chair creaking against the floor as he prepared to make a bold counteroffer. It was double or nothing. He would take the healing light spell as risk compensation and demand the completed new Thousand Circle as his real prize. Wenji could only call him shameless for his greed, but Aster coolly replied that if the terms weren't accepted, he wouldn't do it. Brushing his hair back with a laugh, Wenji found the boy's audacity amusing and agreed to give him the new magic once it was completed. Just when the deal seemed finalized, however, Aster's expression became serious as he stated, "However, I also have a condition." Holding the thesis out, Wenji made a final request of his own, asking that as companions, Aster would help him again when the research is complete. Aster readily agreed to help with the thesis before cheekily adding, "Oh, by the way, I don't know how to read." The Vice Dean froze mid-gesture, his mind completely failing to compute such an absurd statement. With a flash of movement, Aster snatched the papers and laughed, admitting he was just kidding and calling Wenji rigid and boring. His expression then turned serious as he brushed himself off and asked the important question, was Professor Perrin trustworthy? A nostalgic laugh escaped Wenji as he recalled his rivalry with Perrin, a battle for the top spot that lasted all through their academy days. The protagonist, however, correctly interpreted the subtext of that story as Wenji subtly bragging. Still, I was the one on top. While Wenji smiled fondly at the memory of his rival, Aster could only sigh internally at the thought of another lunatic waiting for him at the academy. Later that night, the full moon shone down upon the imposing iron gates of the Blander estate as final preparations were made. A cascade of books and a single, wax-sealed letter suddenly materialized from thin air, tumbling down onto a desk in a cluttered heap. Holding up the now empty subspace pouch, Aster complained to himself about why Wenji had to pack so much unnecessary junk for the trip. As he sorted through the mountain of books, a single letter with an elegant red wax seal caught his eye. He carefully sliced it open with a letter opener, the neat script on the page beginning with the words, "To my dear Aster." The overly affectionate greeting was met with an immediate internal sneer of "Dear my ass." The letter went on to explain that the books were essential magical texts, with a study order carefully laid out to cultivate his intellect. He looked at the signature, which read, "Your friend, Hensi von Blander," the name of the eccentric genius who had given him this task. With a heavy thud, he added another book to the pile, sarcastically muttering to himself, "Quite the gift I've received." Yet, as he surveyed the perfectly organized study path from basic to advanced magic, he had to admit that the lunatic Hensi was a true genius. A small, determined smile finally broke through his cynicism as he looked over the vast wealth of knowledge before him. With newfound purpose, he slammed a fresh piece of parchment and a silver pen down onto his desk. Surrounded by towers of ancient tomes, he began to write, the scratching of his pen starting a new plan under the heading, "List of book sponsors dash." Tallying up the gift, Aster counted about 132 volumes from Hensi, putting aside the matter of the healing light grimoire for a later discussion with Damien. A small smirk appeared as he remembered Damien's happy face, deciding that gaining access to the priceless text could simply be called a friend's privilege. He realized with growing excitement that the 132 volumes were not just a random collection of books. Instead, they formed a complete magical curriculum, a foundational category of knowledge that could build a mage from the ground up. This incredible resource sparked a grander vision within him. His old plan of just stocking a tower with books was no longer enough. Now, his tower would become a true beacon of knowledge, an institution of learning, and the very identity of his future. Elsewhere, under the same full moon, Hensi reflected on the meeting, calling the unexpected outcome an unexpected gain. Indeed, he admitted to himself that his initial plan was cold and simple. Use the boy if he was useful, and toss him aside if he was not. A genuine, intrigued smile touched his lips as he looked out at the night sky and thought, but Aster, he's becoming an interesting fellow. His smile then twisted into something more sinister and calculating as a new thought began. And besides, Hensi's thoughts drifted back to the boy's unsettling response. Replaying the moment, Aster calmly invited him to just kill me. A manic grin had spread across his face as he realized the boy genuinely wanted him to go through with it, even though the threat was only a test. What truly disturbed him was the look in those eyes, which held an absolute emptiness that treated death itself as nothing. He had to admit that this boy was completely different from the other pigs he was used to dealing with, making him interesting indeed. A delighted smile bloomed as he realized he'd found a true peer who could stand on his level and even desired the results of his work. Yet, a single, nagging doubt remained as he wondered, could it really be that he doesn't know how to read? He quickly dismissed the absurd thought, looking up at the moonlit clouds and deciding there was no way that could be true. The next morning arrived, bathing the grand estate in the warm, golden light of a new day. Inside, Aster carefully fastened the cuff of his crisp white shirt, making the final preparations for his departure. With his luggage packed and waiting by the door, he stood ready to leave the Blander mansion and begin his journey to the academy. A maid with glasses and a professional demeanor approached him, announcing, "Sir Aster, it's time to depart soon." As she walked ahead with his luggage, she explained that upon arrival, he would only need to go through a simple document registration. She then informed him that, for his reference, both he and the young Master Damien were exempt from the entrance exam. The maid cast a quick, appraising glance back at him, her golden eyes filled with curiosity. Her lips curled into a faint, knowing smile as she took in his new appearance. She complimented his sharp new uniform, noting that it suited him well and that he truly looked like a full-fledged academy student. After Aster gave a simple thank you, the maid turned and announced it was time for them to leave. Walking along the sun-drenched path, he mused to himself that being exempt from the exam was a special admission perk he could get used to. His quiet contemplation was suddenly shattered by a familiar and incredibly enthusiastic shout of "Friend!" Looking towards the main entrance, he saw Damien waving frantically, standing next to his mother Bianca, who watched the scene with a serene smile. At the carriage door, a lady bids a heartfelt farewell to the two young men, her voice filled with concern. "Damien, please stay safe." And Aster, the heavy wheels of the coach begin to grind forward, slowly pulling away from the familiar sight of their home. As they journey, the cheerful Damien waves from the window while Aster sits beside him, his gaze already fixed on the future. A gentle smile graces the lady's lips as she offers her blessing. "Since it's a great opportunity, I hope you achieve the results you desire." In a distant, shadowed office, a pair of hands close a thick, leather-bound book, a quiet affirmation passing the man's lips. Indeed, Aster's resolve hardens into a firm promise to himself, his thoughts echoing with determination. "The results I desire. Of course, that's what I plan." An announcer's voice booms with promise, describing their destination as Zenion, the greatest academy of the Eastern continent, where countless patrons await. The grand doors of the academy swing open to reveal a world of opportunity, and Aster knows in his heart that he plans to seize it all. A confident smirk touches Aster's lips as he offers a simple, yet deeply meaningful, "Thank you." He looks ahead with unwavering ambition, a silent promise directed at his future peers. "Just wait, my fellow. No, my classmates. I'm coming." Deep in study during the carriage ride, Aster had to admit that Hensey was a truly remarkable magic scholar. The book made him contemplate the basic principles of magic, prompting him to consider the simple example of water. To a thirsty person, a sprinkle of rain could be seen as the very water of life, a cherished gift. However, to someone caught in a storm, that very same water becomes a terrifying and disastrous flood. He closed his eyes in thought, concluding that the endless variations of magic were all just a matter of perspective. His philosophical musings were suddenly shattered by Damien's excited shout of "We've arrived." Aster looked out the window to see the towering, magnificent facade of the legendary Zenion Academy. The powerful horses pulled the grand carriage to a halt right before the academy's main entrance. As the carriage rattled to a stop, Aster took in the sight, his thoughts confirming, "So this is Zenion Academy." The maid then informed them that the ride was over, as a headmaster's teaching dictated all students must walk in on their own 2 feet. The maid gave a final, warm smile, saying, "This is where we part ways. I wish you success at the ceremony." As their carriage rolled away, Damien waved a frantic goodbye while Aster simply stood and watched, taking in the academy's bustling street. Damien suddenly grabbed his arm with surprising strength, urging him on with a desperate shout of "Hurry, friend." With wide, panicked eyes, Damien explained that their maid, Lancy, had warned him there might not be any seats left if they were late. Aster stared back in utter disbelief, his mind screaming, "What nonsense is that?" at the ridiculous idea of a first-come, first-served entrance ceremony. He instantly realized the truth, concluding that the maid's story was just clever bait to keep the perpetually lazy Damien from slacking off. Deciding to let it slide this one time, he figured that while Damien could be blunt, he wasn't truly shameless. Resigning himself to his fate, he was dragged at high speed through the academy grounds, sarcastically telling himself it was definitely not because it was convenient. Their hurried entrance led them into a grand hall, where the low, buzzing murmur of countless other students filled the ornate room. Dozens of faceless students turned in unison to stare at the commotion, their surprised murmurs following the duo through the hall. The grand hall opened into a vast, tiered lecture theater where the murmurs of already seated students echoed off the high ceiling. Completely oblivious to the stares, Damien's face lit up with pure excitement as he marveled at the sheer number of people. He bounced on the balls of his feet, celebrating that Lancy was right about being on time, a statement that only deepened Aster's headache. While Damien continued to celebrate, Aster calmly retrieved a piece of paper from his coat pocket. He scanned the hall with a practiced eye, looking around as he read their assigned location from the paper. Let's see. Class M3, seats 11 and 12. Damien, however, began to panic again, tugging on his friend's sleeve and asking, "Friend, can't we just sit there?" A bead of sweat formed on Aster's temple as he wondered how the same boy who'd thrown a tantrum about attending was now so ridiculously excited. With a swift and subtle movement, he stuck his leg out, sending the overly energetic Damien tumbling to the floor with a yelp. Damien could only stare up from his undignified position on the ground, his eyes wide with utter shock and betrayal. Suddenly, a large, menacing shadow fell over him, cast by an imposing professor who now loomed over the scene of the crime. The imposing professor stared down at the commotion, his brow twitching with irritation as he demanded to know what was going on. Aster knelt beside his friend and asked, "Are you okay?" To which Damien gave a blindingly cheerful thumbs up, insisting he wasn't hurt at all. Popping back to his feet, Damien gave the professor a polite wave and a disarming smile, apologizing for not looking where he was going. Just as the two boys were about to walk away, the professor's sharp command to hold it stopped them dead in their tracks. He held up his arm to reveal a small wet patch on his pristine sleeve, his voice dangerously low as he asked what they had gotten on his clothes. Aster instantly identified the mark as saliva, and his mind raced, knowing that any other noble in Damien's position would have escalated the situation. To his complete surprise, Damien immediately began wiping the sleeve with his own, frantically apologizing and offering to clean it. The professor's face contorted in rage as veins bulged on his forehead, and Aster knew with certainty that they were definitely going to fight. With a furious roar of, "Get lost, you idiot!" the professor unleashed a devastating punch that sent Damien flying across the room. His fury still not sated, the professor turned his murderous glare on the remaining student, growling, "Hey, classmate." Just as the professor was about to strike Damien again, Aster's hand shot out like lightning, catching the powerful fist mid-swing. With a grip of iron, he held the professor's hand still and calmly suggested, "How about stopping now?" The professor's face twisted into a mask of pure fury as he snarled, "And who are you supposed to be?" Shielding a starstruck Damien, Aster met the furious gaze without flinching and declared with absolute certainty, "I'm his friend." The professor let out a short, sharp laugh, acknowledging the boy's loyalty before dropping his briefcase to free up his hands. Aster could only sigh internally at the mess, realizing he would regret this choice, and that his hopes for a quiet first day were officially ruined. Suddenly, a new student with glasses stepped forward, adjusting his collar and noting with amusement that Aster prefers fists over words. The escalating commotion began to draw a crowd, with the murmurs of curious students echoing through the grand hall. A group of onlookers tried to identify the combatants, recognizing the towering professor as a descendant of the Delamphy family. Whispers immediately turned to speculation on who would win, with the odds favoring Delamphy, as rumor had it their family's new student was incredible. An arrogant-looking student began to shove his way through the crowd, belligerently shouting, "Hey, are you guys kidding me?" He angrily questioned the onlookers, demanding to know why they were just standing around instead of stopping the fight before it got out of hand. With a dramatic point, he then demanded to know why everyone was just going to let them fight freely like this without any order. His underlings, however, understood his true meaning and quickly ordered everyone to give the combatants some space. Following their leader's real command, several students began casting a spell to put up a barrier around the area. A shimmering green barrier of magic cracked into place, sealing off the makeshift arena from the excited onlookers. The crowd immediately erupted into a roaring frenzy, with students shouting out bets and eagerly anticipating the academy's first duel. Standing apart from the chaotic mob, the mysterious student with glasses watched the scene unfold with a cool and calculating silence. A slow, confident smirk spread across Aster's face as he calmly sized up the enraged professor. The professor cracked his knuckles with a loud pop, formally introducing himself with booming pride. "I am Hickster, second son of the proud Delamphy family." Taking a boxer's stance, Professor Hickster's aura flared as he demanded, "What is your name?" Aster simply adjusted his tie, coolly replying, "Well, unlike you, I'm not from any great lineage. Just think of me as some passerby." Hickster let out a short, arrogant laugh, dismissing the boy's background as irrelevant and generously offering him the first move. In response to this grand offer, the protagonist simply took a single, deliberate step forward. A slow, mocking grin spread across Aster's face as the single thought, "This guy's hilarious. echoed in his mind. He loosened his own tie with a wild, manic smile, taunting the professor. For someone who hates talking, you sure have a long tongue. The taunt landed perfectly, and the professor's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. With a guttural roar of, "You bastard," Hickster lunged forward with explosive speed. He threw a devastating right hook, a punch with enough force to shatter bone, aimed directly at the boy's head. Yet the attack met only empty air as Aster leaned back with impossible grace, a serene smile on his face as the blow whistled past. Refusing to be shown up, Professor Hickster immediately launched another powerful, glowing punch. The professor's eyes widened in surprise as Aster's voice cut through the air with a simple, chilling warning. "Oh, and one more thing." Blue, crackling energy erupted around the boy's fist as he declared, "It's not one opponent you're facing. It's two." In a flash of movement that was almost too fast to see, Aster unleashed a devastating counterpunch of his own. The blow connected with a sickening crunch, a spray of blood erupting from the professor's face upon impact. Such was the incredible force of the attack that it lifted the large professor off his feet and sent him flying backward. Hickster's boots scraped violently against the wooden floor as he struggled to absorb the momentum and stay upright. He stared at the boy in stunned disbelief, a single bead of sweat rolling down his temple as he wondered, how can a punch be this heavy? The professor looked upon the boy wreathed in blue lightning, his glowing eyes forcing him to question, is he really a magician? As he touched his split lip, a soft green glow began to mend the wound, making him realize with shock that his opponent was a healer. Having already recovered, Damien began casting his own healing magic, not on his friend, but on the professor he was fighting. A look of pure, unadulterated joy spread across Damien's face as he giggled with delight at being able to use his favorite spell. The professor could only stare in utter disbelief, his mind reeling as he thought, wow, a prestigious family really shows, huh? Aster immediately took advantage of the distraction, launching a powerful, mana-infused kick at the professor's exposed side. A shimmering green barrier instantly materialized out of thin air, blocking the devastating kick just moments before it made contact. Hickster gritted his teeth and roared with effort as Aster's fists, wreathed in blue energy, began to hammer against the shield. With a final, explosive punch, Aster shattered the barrier and landed a clean hit, grinning as he remarked, wow, you're solid. A bizarre rhythm was established in the duel. One of them gets beaten down by Aster, while the other is gleefully healed by Damien. As Aster landed another savage blow, the crowd could only watch in awe, thinking that they were witnessing a fight between two crazy fools. The protagonist's feet remained firmly planted on the ground, his heart pounding with excitement as he prepared to receive the next attack. A cold sweat dripped down the professor's face as the single, terrifying question echoed in his mind. Am I scared? The roaring crowd only fueled his humiliation, their cheers of, what are you doing? Don't hold back, grating on his nerves. His fans continued their adoring chants, hailing him as the sacred pride of his family and the great hope of the warriors. The shouts of encouragement grew louder, with students screaming, I'll trust only you, as they eagerly awaited his victory. A spotlight of expectation seemed to fall upon him as the entire hall chanted his name, demanding that he end it quickly. The immense pressure and humiliation finally caused his fear to boil over into pure, unadulterated rage. He let out a furious scream, unleashing his full power as he raged. How dare you? A mere magician. His ultimate attack, a punch infused with all his might and pride, was stopped dead in its tracks by a single, bespectacled student. Aster, now inexplicably wearing glasses, looked at the fist stopped just inches from his face and commented with detached curiosity, oh, not bad. His attack completely nullified by this unbelievable defense. The professor could only roar in pure, unadulterated fury. With a final, desperate roar of don't underestimate me, Professor Hickster lunged forward one last time. The new student, Ixter, met the furious charge with a deceptively casual kick that sent a shockwave through the hall. The sheer force of the counterattack sent the professor flying backward in a chaotic, tumbling arc. A section of the crowd erupted into wild cheers, screaming, oh, finally! As expected of Ixter, Hickster grunted as he landed, feeling the full impact of the kick even though it seemed to have no weight behind it. He staggered on his feet, his body feeling unnaturally light as he struggled to regain his balance. The world suddenly flipped upside down as a strange gravitational force pulled him off his feet, sending him crashing to the floor. Ixter landed with the grace of a cat, while Aster stood beside him, having never moved from his original spot. The bespectacled boy calmly adjusted his tie, looking down at the fallen professor with an analytical gaze. All Ixter could do was stare back over his shoulder, his face a perfect mask of confusion and utter defeat. A final, blood-curdling scream of pure terror escaped Professor Ixter's lips as he was utterly defeated. The victorious Ixter stood over him, the strange, gravity-distorting magic still lingering in the air. Watching this strange conclusion to the fight, Aster's expression was thoughtful and intensely analytical. He noted with some amusement that Damien, ever the pacifist, was still dutifully casting healing magic on the unconscious man. Realizing this farce could continue indefinitely, he knew that a single, decisive strike was needed to knock the professor out for good. A plan began to form in his mind as he flexed his hand and thought, "Let's see. This should do it." Blue lightning began to crackle and coalesce around his open palm, a special technique he had developed with his comrades in a past life. This unique art involved extracting raw, destructive energy directly from the collision of magical particles. It was a strange power that used magic as a fuel source, but belonged neither to the realm of magic nor martial arts. The result was a devastating punch, a purely technical application of magical properties that he was about to unleash. With a roar of effort, Aster's lightning-infused fist met the professor's desperate block in a cataclysmic explosion of blue light. The sheer force of the impact sent a shockwave tearing through the hall, shattering the student's magical barrier into a million pieces. The student who had orchestrated the duel could only stare in wide-eyed horror, stammering, "What is this?" Professor Ixter was thrown backward like a rag doll, completely overwhelmed by the single, decisive blow. His body slammed onto the wooden floor, skidding to a halt as he was knocked completely unconscious. As the dust and magical energy slowly settled, Aster stood calmly over the defeated form of the once proud professor. The entire crowd of student onlookers was frozen in place, their faces pale with utter disbelief at what they had just witnessed. There was no other way to describe it. They had just seen an unbelievable and completely one-sided beatdown. From the crowd, the bespectacled Ixter raised a triumphant fist into the air, as if celebrating a shared victory. Wreathed in the fading green light of the broken barrier, Aster raised his own fist in a silent toast and said, "Cheers." As the dust settled, Aster's silent toast was a demand for a cheer, a reaction, and a response from the stunned onlookers. The crowd finally broke their silence, erupting into a roaring cheer as they questioned if he was even a magician after such a brutal, sweaty fight. The students who had bet against him now understood, screaming that the underdog had pulled off an incredible counterattack. Meanwhile, Ixter, the student who had helped him, turned his back on the roaring crowd with a cool, enigmatic expression. An ecstatic Damien rushed to his side, shouting, "We won!" And Aster simply ruffled his hair with a soft "yeah." With a sly grin, he then gave his friend a pointed look, telling him it was time to stop sucking his thumb. From across the hall, a different group of students watched the victorious duo with expressions of clear disdain. A blond boy with sharp green eyes sneered, remarking on the impropriety of a Magic Academy student engaging in such a brawl. The bespectacled Ixter, standing right next to him, turned with a smirk and agreed, "Truly vulgar." At the same time, the boisterous student from before began shoving his way through the crowd, shouting, "Move! Move! You idiots!" An enraged faculty member suddenly appeared, his voice booming through the hall as he screamed, "Who starts brawling from the very first day?" As the professor threatened to take everyone if the culprits didn't step forward, Aster could only sigh, admitting to himself, I caused some trouble." He remained completely unfazed by the surrounding chaos. However, knowing that as a professional troubleshooter, this was just another day at the office. Before he could formulate a plan, Damien grabbed him and began waving frantically, cheerfully confessing to the crime for both of them. The professor's eyes narrowed in on the duo, a flash of recognition on his face as he identified the culprits. With the evidence of the knocked-out Professor Ixter plain to see, another staff member confirmed, "Correct. We are indeed the ones." Sometime later, the two boys were summoned by name to enter a grand office through a pair of ornate double doors. Damien answered the summons with an enthusiastic yes. Yes? While Aster simply closed his eyes and offered a quiet confirmation of his own. The headmaster decided to let the incident slide without penalty, citing their honest confession and the lack of serious injury. His gaze then locked onto Aster with a sharp intensity, giving him a final, personal warning. I'll be keeping an eye on you from now on. Leaving the headmaster's office, Aster let out a quiet sigh of relief, a single bead of sweat trickling down his temple. Some time had passed, and the sun now shone brightly on the academy's peaceful central courtyard. He and Damien cautiously peeked back into the lecture hall, worried they had missed the entrance ceremony entirely. To their immense relief, the hall was still just buzzing with the low murmur of students, the ceremony not yet having begun. The moment they entered, however, the students' whispers turned to them, with everyone pointing and asking, "Oh, is that him?" The crowd murmured in disbelief, unable to comprehend how a slender magic track student could so thoroughly defeat a martial artist. While Damien waved happily at their new fan club, Aster could only think, damn it, I'm practically a celebrity now. Looking for their seats, Aster finally spotted their new acquaintance, Aster, who was waving them over. Damien's eyes sparkled with joy as he realized their friend had saved their spots, exclaiming, "Our friend is awesome." Completely drained from the day's chaos, Aster let out a final, exhausted sigh and mumbled, "Yeah, I guess so." The headmaster cleared his throat, and with a formal ahem, and so, the long-awaited entrance ceremony speech finally began. Holding a large blue crystal, he began a long-winded speech about following the teachings of the academy's first headmaster. The speech droned on, its sheer monotony causing Damien to begin nodding off against Aster's shoulder. It wasn't long before Damien was completely asleep, drool trickling down his chin and onto Aster's pristine new uniform. A small, exasperated smirk crossed Aster's face as he looked at his blissfully unconscious friend. He gently adjusted Damien's collar, wiping away the mess as he quietly told him to quit drooling already. Suddenly, a staff member rushed onto the stage, interrupting the headmaster mid-sentence to deliver an urgent message. The man leaned in and whispered into the headmaster's ear, the contents of the message hidden from the student body. A flustered ahem was all the headmaster could manage as he tried to regain his composure after the sudden interruption. He then tapped his crystal staff, abruptly ending the ceremony with a quick, "Sorry, students. Something urgent has come up." Before making his hasty exit, the headmaster patted his chest and clarified that while his speech was over, the ceremony would continue. As he shuffled off stage, the sharp, authoritative click-clack of high heels announced the arrival of his replacement. A tall, formidable woman with a cascade of orange hair and a powerful aura stepped up to the podium. Her voice boomed through the hall like a thunderclap as she let out a furious, ear-splitting shout of, "Attention, everyone." The entire student body flinched in unison, their idle chatter instantly silenced by the sheer force of her command. Even Damien was violently jolted awake from his slumber, his eyes wide with shock and a trickle of drool still on his chin. Another student nearly jumped out of his skin, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The woman placed a hand on her hip and introduced herself with an iron will, "I am Jera," stating she would continue the ceremony. Wasting no time, she moved to the freshman oath and called forth the Magic Division's representative, Dahlia de Denai. A new wave of whispers rippled through the crowd as Dahlia walked to the stage, the students shocked that a member of the Denai family actually took the exam. One of the students whispered that the Denai family would never allow a child with lacking skills to take the entrance exam in the first place. From his seat, Aster watched the silver-haired girl, his mind echoing her full name, Dahlia de Denai. He recalled that while the Declan family was the foremost mage house in the East, the Denai family was the second most renowned, and Dahlia was destined to become the future representative mage for the family that was always fated to be second best. A flicker of a memory from his past life surfaced, recalling that she was a capable ally who had helped him greatly during his time as a troubleshooter. But their personalities clashed intensely, and with sparks flying between them, he had to admit they were what some might call bad friends. A mischievous smirk touched his lips as he thought to himself that, regardless of their rivalry, it was nice to see her again. After Dahlia finished her oath, Jera's voice boomed once more, calling for the martial arts representative. "Step forward, Paul." A quiet, unassuming student with his eyes closed stood from his seat, answering the summons with a simple, quiet, yes. Watching from his own seat, Ixter noted that since no family name was announced, the noble houses in the audience must be absolutely fuming. With both representatives having spoken, a staff member announced, "That concludes the oath of the entrance ceremony." Jera then took the stage once more, her voice echoing as she began to introduce the professors for the incoming class. As Dahlia walked back to her seat, she cast a cold, almost imperceptible glance towards a specific section of the audience. Aster felt the weight of her stare, looking up and wondering, "HM? Is it just me?" The intense, unblinking gaze continued, leaving him with the distinct and uncomfortable feeling that she was staring directly at him. He quickly pushed the thought aside, his eyes narrowing as he decided that ultimately, it didn't matter. As Dahlia ascended a short flight of stairs, her foot suddenly caught on the edge of a step, causing her to stumble badly. A startled "ack" escaped her lips as she tumbled forward, crashing hard onto the stone floor below. Aster's eyes widened in realization as he looked at the professor standing impassively at the top of the stairs, recognizing him as Professor Perrin. The professor, a man with a distinctive mustache, ignored the commotion completely, thinking only of his own appointment and wondering, when will he show up? A different professor then stepped up to the podium, his voice soft as he addressed the silent hall. He offered the students a simple and polite greetings before preparing to introduce himself. The man announced, "I am Perrin, and I'll be in charge of the basic principles of magology course." Aster watched him intently, thinking to himself that he had expected an atmosphere more like Hensei's. But this man was completely different. He reminded himself that Hensei also wears the mask of a true gentleman, so he shouldn't judge his new target too quickly. Jera's voice cut through his thoughts, announcing the end of the professor introductions and the conclusion of the entrance ceremony. As she instructed the students to find their dormitories, a soft snoring sound could be heard from Damien, who had fallen asleep again. Aster roughly shook his friend awake with a firm command to rise, causing Damien to groggily ask if the ceremony was over. With a perfectly straight face, he delivered the bad news. "No, you got caught sleeping and were expelled. Time to go home." Damien's eyes shot wide open, his face a perfect mask of horror and disbelief at the devastating news. The prank landed perfectly, causing Damien to let out a blood-curdling shriek of absolute, soul-crushing terror. The scene then shifts to later that day, with the warm light of the setting sun bathing the grand dormitories. With a weary sigh, Aster walked alone down a long, elegant hallway, musing that Damien really screamed like that from a little teasing. He finally reached the end of the corridor, stopping before a single door and wondering, "Is this the place?" With a soft creak, the heavy wooden door swung open to reveal his new living quarters. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face as he realized that, of course, they would place his room on the top floor. He had to admit the academy was impressive, as he surveyed the spacious and handsomely furnished twin room. On his bed, he found a neatly packaged box of living supplies, confirming that all students were issued the same items. He began the simple process of unpacking, placing a plain, spiral-bound notebook into one of the drawers. Finally, he hung his new academy uniform neatly in the closet, officially settling into his new life. As he finished unpacking, the door to his room creaked open, revealing his new roommate. Aster instantly recognized the quiet boy from the ceremony, the martial arts representative whose name was Paul. Paul let out a weary sigh, his face a mask of annoyance as he muttered his desire to just live quietly. He then walked into the room without another word, dropping his bag and stating coldly, "I don't care what you do." The boy immediately set his boundaries, declaring a preference for not meddling in each other's affairs, including any further conversation. When Aster remained silent, Paul stepped forward aggressively, his face inches from Aster's as he demanded an answer. The protagonist simply stared back, a flicker of his own annoyance showing as he sized up this arrogant roommate. Paul's impatience grew as he asked, "Why aren't you answering?" While Aster's mind was already calculating just how good the top student could be. In a movement too fast to see, Aster was suddenly behind his roommate, his arm locked around Paul's neck in a test. Completely caught off guard and struggling for breath, Paul could only stammer in shock, "What are you trying to pull right now?" After releasing his hold, Aster gave a small, appreciative smile, his inner thoughts admitting, "Oh, not bad." He was impressed by the subtle details, like the way Paul held his sword to ensure it wouldn't bump into anything when drawn. The tense atmosphere was shattered by Damien bursting through the door, yelling, "Friend, hurry up and come out." With a placid smile, Aster simply told him that he was just about to head out himself. Paul, however, cut in with a final condition, patting down his uniform and stating, "Do whatever you want." But in return, Aster looked back over his shoulder with a sly grin, finishing the negotiation with, "Don't complain if I sing past midnight." Got it. Outside, an impatient Damien waved frantically from the bottom of the steps, shouting for his friend. As they walked through the courtyard, Damien asked, "Who's your roommate?" Receiving only a blunt "don't know" in response. Damien was shocked that he didn't even know the person's name, but Aster simply replied that he'd been busy. The boy's disappointment vanished instantly as he excitedly proposed they tour the academy, just as their maid Lancy had suggested. As they began their tour, Aster's internal monologue noted that the vastness of Zenion Academy was precisely why new students were told to learn the layout. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the empty courtyard and bathing the grand architecture in a soft, golden glow. He turned to Damien and agreed that touring the grounds now wasn't a bad idea at all. Inwardly, however, he closed his eyes, admitting that something was brushing against his senses, a familiar and unwelcome presence. He could sense them scattered throughout the academy, their auras like faint blue flames burning atop the distant rooftops. He knew exactly who they were, the infamous troubleshooters, and they were undoubtedly working for Declan. A predatory grin bloomed on his face as he decided to use this tour to see just how many enemies were lurking in the shadows. The two friends walked together across the sprawling plaza, their long shadows stretching out behind them in the fading light. Damien playfully ruffled Aster's hair, a moment of simple joy shared between them against the backdrop of a beautiful sunset. As the sky exploded into a brilliant canvas of orange and purple, Damien could only look on with an expression of pure, unadulterated wow. Damien's eyes went wide with childlike glee as he pointed at the water, exclaiming, "It's a lake, a lake. We don't have anything like this back home." They both stood at the water's edge, watching the last rays of the setting sun dance across the rippling surface. A bead of sweat trickled down Aster's temple as he sighed, thinking that babysitting this noble air was truly exhausting. He turned to the awestruck boy and casually suggested, "Then ask them to make one for you," leaving Damien completely baffled. A devious smirk played on his lips as he nonchalantly added that all it really takes is digging a hole and pouring in some water. Damien's face lit up with pure inspiration, and he clenched his fists with newfound resolve to have an even bigger lake built for him. Miles away, the maid Lancy suddenly froze, a metaphorical needle scratching across the record of her thoughts, as if sensing a great disaster. Aster leaned against the railing, now fully invested in his prank, and casually asked Damien what he should name this hypothetical lake. After a moment of thought, he decided on the perfect name to honor all the hard work that would go into it: blood, sweat, and tears. Back at the mansion, Lancy's ponytail shot straight into the air, a physical reaction to the immense and unforeseen workload she had just been cursed with. Damien then pointed to a grand statue of a mage and added it to his growing list of demands, calling it Blood, Sweat, and Tears #2. A manic grin spread across Aster's face as he upped the ante, suggesting they make it a dragon with gorgeous scales, an idea Damien absolutely loved. In a distant kitchen, the maid Lancy suddenly shivered uncontrollably, a cold chill running down her spine for no apparent reason. With their wild planning sessions seemingly over, Damien happily suggested that they head back from their tour. Aster's playful demeanor vanished, however, as his mind calculated that he had spotted 7 troubleshooters, with roughly 10 in total hiding on campus. As he mentally mapped their locations, his eyes were drawn to a single, ominous building, the second magic hall. Everything clicked into place as he realized that this was Professor Perrin's laboratory, and he was, just as Hensey predicted, their target. A brief flash of Hensey's confident smile appeared in his mind, the man's plan being to let Declan know that he has powerful allies. The logic was simple. Declan would naturally suspect Professor Perrin of being that ally due to his connections in the area. His theory was confirmed an instant later as he caught a furtive glimpse of a shadowy figure moving stealthily between the trees. A devious smile crept across Aster's face as he mused, I was wondering why they weren't tailing him yet. Now that the cloaked figures had revealed themselves, he knew they had latched on at the perfect time for his own plans to unfold. As the moon rose high above the sprawling academy, he decided it was time to find out exactly how much they knew. Night fell completely, the campus pathways lit only by the soft, magical hum of the ornate street lamps. A cloaked troubleshooter soared through the night sky, a silent shadow moving from one rooftop to the next. He moved with supernatural agility, using lampposts and trees as springboards to cross the grounds in a blur. His descent was silent as he landed perfectly on a window ledge, ready to begin his infiltration. But as his feet touched the stone, a second figure emerged from the darkness within the room, stating simply, "You're here." The assassin entered the moonlit room to meet his comrade, immediately asking where the rest of their team had gone. He was informed that an emergency directive had been issued from headquarters. They were to gather at the sub-target's nest. The lead assassin relayed the new intel, explaining that since the main target's tail was stepped on, an objective would be delivered at midnight. His comrade took a moment to process this, thoughtfully concluding, So that's how it is." The intel confirmed their suspicions. Because the main target Hensey had made a move, their specific sub-target had to be Professor Parent. A cold sweat of pure terror broke out on the second assassin's face as he understood the danger of their new mission. He argued in a panic that they would need backup from the elite single numbers if they were expected to break through the monster-like professors. The leader coldly shut down that hope, stating flatly, "Number 1 won't come. Neither will the other single numbers." Just as the subordinate was about to despair, his leader's tone shifted as he offered a single word of hope. However, he then revealed their powerful reinforcement, a legendary figure known as the Fire Demon, Callahan. "He'll be joining us." The mere mention of the name made the other assassin flinch back in shock, his mind unable to comprehend the news. A vision of the infamous Callahan, vice leader of Declan's Mage Corps, appeared, a man powerful enough for the job, but one whose involvement still spelled immense danger. A cold shiver ran down the lead assassin's spine as he considered Callahan's reputation for being cold-blooded and willing to use any means necessary. His subordinate began to sweat bullets, the grim reality setting in that they were truly being told to risk their lives for this mission. The leader tried to rationalize the situation, noting that the matter may not escalate and that exposing a well-known mage is a burden in itself. Taking a deep breath to calm his nerves, the second assassin finally agreed to the plan, and the two prepared to move. They soared into the night sky like twin shadows, knowing that if they didn't join up soon, their chances of survival would plummet. Miles away, Aster stood on his dorm room balcony, his gaze fixed on the moonlit courtyard as two birds flew past. His expression was grim as he processed the intel he'd gathered, his mind focused on the single phrase, "Midnight tonight." He still couldn't understand why the assassins were gathering to meet with Callahan, of all the absurdly dangerous people in the world. A memory of the demonic Callahan flashed in his mind, a legendary figure who was enjoying his prime even back when Aster was active. He recalled the man's pivotal role in the past, after House Deculin risked everything to fight House Blando. He remembered Callahan's unwavering loyalty, how he had stayed with the declining Deculin family and proven himself to the very end. A vision of the past showed Callahan kneeling dutifully before his master in a vast, red-stained throne room. Callahan was dangerous even then, but his true prime as a legendary war mage began only after the war with the Blando family. In the fires of that conflict, he became known as Deculin's unstoppable fire demon, a name that struck fear across the continent. Remembering the sheer destructive power of this man, Aster's eyes hardened with resolve as he realized he absolutely needed to catch him. The opportunity was too great to ignore, as Callahan's fire magic was one of the secret arts he desperately wanted to acquire. Everything suddenly clicked into place for Aster, and he now understood why the troubleshooter had followed him only to leave. A grim certainty settled over him as he stared into the night, realizing, the target they're talking about, Hensey's paper, is with me. He knew his copy of the thesis couldn't be a fake, and the plan was for it to be delivered to the sub-target, Professor Parent. Therefore, there was no possibility that the assassins, with their glowing red eyes, were after anything other than the very paper he was tasked to deliver. With all the pieces falling into place, a single, decisive thought hung in Aster's mind. Then, His eyes narrowed with grim certainty as he came to the only logical conclusion. The target being delivered today is a fake paper. Back in the darkness of his dorm room, he began to prepare, silently fastening the clasps on a dark, tactical uniform. He meticulously pulled on a pair of black leather gloves, his movements swift and silent in the gloom. With a final, sharp click, he secured his sheathed sword to his belt, fully equipped for the dangerous night ahead. Now draped in a hooded cloak, he turned, a silent shadow ready to melt into the night. Before leaving, he cast a final glance toward the other side of the room, where his roommate Paul was seemingly fast asleep. But the moment Aster's back was turned, Paul's eyes snapped open, his sharp gaze silently tracking the boy's every move. In Aster's bed lay a crude wooden mannequin with a hastily painted face, a simple but effective decoy for anyone checking the room. A single light remained lit in the high tower of the second magic hall, the stage now perfectly set for the midnight operation. With a voice as cold as the marble floor, the man at the desk critiqued his subordinate. Next time, if you're going to disguise yourself, learn to refine the form of ether first. That's the basics of covert operations. The master's sharp profile was cast in the warm glow of a lone candle, his expression unreadable as he absorbed the information. His crimson eyes narrowed dangerously as a grim understanding dawned upon him, a single thought cutting through the silence. I see. Just as the realization settled, the ornate doors to the study swung open, revealing the presence of an uninvited guest. He mused on the sheer audacity of the trespassers, who had finally overstepped their bounds by invading his personal territory so brazenly. The cloaked mercenary took another step forward, his shadow looming over the desk as he awaited his master's next command. A second figure, completely obscured by a dark hood and mask, materialized in the doorway, his silence more threatening than any weapon. A flicker of pure disdain crossed the master's face as he let out a quiet sigh, his thoughts filled with contempt for Deculin. These rat bastards. Bathed in the flickering candlelight, his features blurred for a moment, a portrait of a man contemplating a difficult, yet necessary, course of action. Cutting through the tension, he suddenly uttered a single name, Pola, causing the cloaked figure to flinch as his true identity was effortlessly exposed. He calmly analyzed the situation, his expression firm as he concluded, "No, that cunning guy wouldn't get caught so easily." The scene suddenly shifts to a grand hall where a new figure makes a dramatic entrance, his heavy footsteps echoing as he greets his target. "Nice to see you, Professor Perrin." In a flash of violent light, a massive explosion tears through the location, sending debris and bodies flying in a maelstrom of destruction. Back in the relative calm of the office, the subordinate known as Pola nervously presents the sealed letter he risked his life to acquire. Pola breaks into a cold sweat, his eyes wide with terror as he finds himself unable to utter a single word in his own defense. His master's voice cuts through the silence, laced with contempt. "You were trying to find a way to deliver the paper while avoiding Deculin's eyes, but in the end, you get caught so pathetically." The man's eyes glint menacingly in the dim light as he delivers a thinly veiled threat. "Well, if there is a next time." As confident footsteps walk away, the master is left alone with his thoughts, a single pressing question now consuming his mind. "What are you plotting, Hensey?" He takes the letter, the wax seal confirming the sender's identity and his own suspicions. "Hensey, so it was you." Meanwhile, a charismatic man with crimson hair and a devilish smile makes his spectacular debut, announcing, "My name is Callahan." Professor Perrin's face twists into a mask of pure disgust as he spits out his words with venom. "Your disgusting smell is making my nose rot away." Callahan chuckles, completely unfazed as his gaze sweeps over the others in the room, sizing up the mercenaries with keen interest. The masked swordsman and the professor are both taken aback, instantly on high alert at the intruder's shocking audacity. With eyes glowing like burning coals, the professor issues a chillingly calm threat. "Well, should I leave one eye and one arm?" Callahan throws his head back and laughs with genuine delight, utterly thrilled by the hostile reception before suggesting they get down to business. The professor's hand raises, his finger aimed directly at his own subordinate as he makes a grim declaration. "That guy is going to die." Despite the man's dramatic entrance, the professor internally scoffs, feigning ignorance as if it's the first time he's ever heard the name Callahan. Losing his patience, The professor leans forward and cuts through the charade with a sharp command. So stop the nonsense and get to the point. A single, sharp laugh escapes Callahan's lips as his playful demeanor finally cracks, revealing a truly sinister grin underneath. A brilliant orange magic circle ignites around Callahan's hand, his focus now aimed squarely at the room's most powerful occupant, and the professor. Amidst the fiery chaos, the professor calmly analyzes the attack's magical properties, concluding, it's highly likely that those Deculan rats set up concealment magic. A blinding, cross-shaped explosion of pure energy erupts, marking the violent collision of two overwhelmingly powerful spells. Outside the estate, the night remains deceptively peaceful, the magical silencing barrier holding strong against the raging battle within. Steeling his resolve in the face of immense danger, the subordinate clenches his fist and responds to his master's order with a simple, determined yes. A torrent of brilliant blue energy is summoned forth in an instant, weaving a complex defensive magic circle to nullify the enemy's attack. The professor's voice is grim as he sets a new expectation. From this moment on, I'll think of you as a mercenary before being a student, so take care of your own life. A shadowy hand lashes out and grabs the subordinate's collar, yanking him back just as the full force of the blast is about to hit. Master and mercenary stand together within a hastily erected fortress of magical ice, shielding them from the searing heat of the explosion. Even with the protection, the swordsman is thrown off balance by the sheer force of the impact, letting out a sharp grunt of pain. As the embers begin to settle, the professor's voice cuts through the chaos, sharply calling out his subordinate's name, Pola. Surrounded by swirling flames, Callahan correctly deduces the mission's origin, shouting, that document envelope. It's definitely from that Blando trash. His face contorts into a shadowy, unsettling grin as he relishes the chaos, asking no one in particular, shall I play around a bit? Professor Perrin watches the spectacle unfold with unnerving stillness, his expression betraying no hint of concern. He glances down at his trembling subordinate, his quiet question hanging heavy in the air. Can I only rely on that rookie mercenary? The mercenary stands his ground before the shattered crystalline shield, his blade the only thing between him and the raging inferno. With a deliberate slowness, the professor adjusts his cufflink as he calmly contemplates his next move. What to do? A sudden, violent burst of blue energy sends several other hidden assassins flying, their bodies tossed aside like ragdolls in the blink of an eye. Callahan's excitement transforms into a monstrous visage, his face splitting into a fanged grin as his eyes glow with raw power. He finally unleashes his magic, erupting in a pillar of fire that radiates pure, unrestrained destructive force. Pola's face is a mask of sheer terror as he is caught directly in the path of the attack, the overwhelming pressure bearing down on him. A cloaked figure lifts a mask to his face, his voice a calm whisper against the rising chaos. It's been a while. His gloved hand holds the distinctive striped mask, a silent promise of the immense skill and authority he wields. His piercing blue eyes flare with power from under his hood as his true identity is revealed. Not Aster, but troubleshooter number one. He watches the distant battle unfold with a look of cool analysis, a quiet acknowledgement passing his lips. Now it's really starting. In the distance, a massive explosion of pure azure energy erupts from one of the Academy's towers, completely obliterating its structure. From his vantage point, the troubleshooter witnesses the awe-inspiring sight of a colossal beam of magic tearing a hole in the night sky. At the very center of the cataclysm, a powerful mage with glowing eyes unleashes the devastating spell, their magic circle radiating with unimaginable power.